Now you're on.
Formal. It's okay. I just cinched my tie up, so now I'm in podcast
Yes,
mode.
we are both wearing three-piece suits.
How you doing, Mike AM? It's a good day for a podcast. He said, yeah, let's do it. I said, fuck yeah, okay, let's do it. And that's how it happened, and it's happening now.
Steve Ferrell. Ferrell?
Ferrell. Yeah, like Will Ferrell.
Like Will Ferrell.
Apparently we're related. That's what I've heard.
Really?
Like somewhere down the line, he's like a distant cousin.
Oh.
I've never seen the family tree. This is completely hearsay as far as I'm concerned, but...
No, it's a fact. Second cousins.
But then the one day when I really need some money, I'll be like, Will.
Remember your second cousin,
Right,
Steve? Yeah, if you type in Steve Ferrell drums, all you get is Will Ferrell.
Is Will Ferrell?
Yeah, on YouTube.
Yeah, because there's probably not a lot of drum stuff on the internet about me.
Yeah, no, I guess... Yeah, I mean, you checked out before YouTube?
Before internet.
Even before?
I checked out before the internet. I'm so old.
So, if you're not a musician, what are you doing on my podcast? What do you do now?
I don't know, man. I teach yoga.
Yeah.
I teach meditation and mindfulness practice to people. Lately, I've actually been taking some courses and some workshops to get into more of a counseling role. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm headed, right? I'm writing books, or I wrote a book. So there's that.
Whoa. What's the book called?
The book is called Mindful Yoga-Based Acceptance and Commitment Therapy.
Ah.
Or MyAct for short.
Where can people get that?
It's not out yet. It's going to be coming out in the spring. I think it should be out in April. But it's also
That's about the time I plan on getting this podcast out.
Awesome. So there you go. Then hopefully the book will be out. But it's not even like it's sort of it's a clinical manual. So it's geared more towards primarily teaching people in mental health professions, psychotherapists, social workers, how to use more evidence-based yoga practices and what they do. And then the flip side is to teach yoga teachers who don't usually get a lot of interpersonal training, mental health training, but we kind of come up against it quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So for yoga teachers who want to learn a little bit more about evidence-based mental health care practices. Yeah. Which is far, far away from music. So far away.
I don't think anything's that far away from music.
No, it's never far away from music. I also don't think music is very far away from mindfulness practice. And
True. Yeah, I was actually having this... It wasn't a debate, but my friend was telling me that he gets everything that he thinks you would get out of meditation, he's getting it out of music. And on the one hand, I totally agree because it's a flow activity and you do lose yourself in it. But after thinking about it for a while, I think the one thing that separates it is that you're concentrating on a stimulus and an output, right? So you're picking something up and you have to focus to put something out.
yeah.
Whereas in meditation, obviously there's different goals to meditation and different ways to go about it. And there is, like a fire gazing meditation or something like that, where it is kind of the same thing where you're just focusing on a singular thing. But there's also this one type, which I won't go and say it's like I'm just going to cut that part out entirely and pretend I kept talking. So there's also this one type of meditation where you just kind of focus on not being and not, eliminating everything.
Sort of like dropping self away.
Yeah, and you can't do that with music.
and yeah, so like what you're kind of talking about is like stimulus response, like call and response sort of practice, right? Like and even in meditative practices, there's things that you can do like that, like even walking meditation, where the idea is, especially within Zen, Kinhin is the term for walking meditation, but a lot of it is, okay, feel how the foot makes contact with the floor, feel how the foot leaves contact with the floor, and that you're practicing doing that again and again, or feeling that happen and noticing stuff that pops up in the mind and around that. But with regular sitting practice, for the most part, you're really, air quotes, trying to do nothing, right? That as things come in, you're trying really not to do much with them. And so people will even ask me, like, can I just do walking meditation? And I'll say, walking meditation is, I think, a good adjunct to sitting practice. But if one of the primary functions of sitting practice is to actually like examine mind, it's really difficult to examine mind when you're constantly focusing on something to do. Especially like playing music where there's a heavy focus component on what's being done, right? That you might be focusing so much on what's being done that you might miss the fact that your mind is saying a bunch of stuff to you at the same time. Mm-hmm. Whereas in sitting practice, that's the idea, is you just sit and maybe you have an anchor like the breath and you just like, okay, what's my mind doing today?
I like that you mentioned these two sides that don't get along a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. The really feely yoga people who don't need evidence for something. They're just like, oh yes, this makes me feel good, or I like this, whatever. Yeah. And then the people who need the evidence, and a lot of the times, both of those camps kind of suffer from their hard-headedness in doing things a certain way.
Absolutely. I see that all the time. Especially as somebody who, like, I tend to sit in both camps. I'm a very feely kind of guy. Even in yoga, like, I buy into chakras. Like, I in my body, I feel them. I don't, like, obviously you can't cut me open and be like, oh, well, there's your root chakra in your pelvic floor. Like, let's cut your abs open and see your third chakra.
You just pull this glowing orb out of your guts.
Oh, it's yellow. It's yellow. Yeah. It's just like they said it was going to be. And then, so there's that part of me. And then there's the part of me that I love science. Like, I love it when there's good data to back something up, or even just the fact that these days, how we practice science is getting so much more refined, right? Where it's, like within the book that I was talking about, the My Act, the ACT portion, acceptance and commitment therapy, is sort of like what we would call like a third wave of cognitive behavioral therapies. And the way that they talk about it is it's a bottom up approach. So rather than doing a bunch of therapy on people like with a vague theory and then starting to refine it as it goes, they started with the actual idea about it first, like got some good science, and then started to roll it out. Which is, I think it's an interesting way to do it. Like, it's like, okay, here's the theories that we have. Let's figure out some ways to test it. And then we'll actually like give it to people to use.
What sources did you inform your book from, and what? I'm very interested in this. I wish we had a copy to look at.
Yeah,
there aren't physical copies.
No, there's no physical copies. They're just in the interweb somewhere.
Oh yeah,
as we send copies back and forth to each other for doing like editing and stuff like that.
Is it like a joint project? Or
I wrote it with two other people. So I'm the yoga part primarily, and another man, Timothy Gordon, who has his master's in social work, who's also here in Hamilton, and another woman named Jessica Borshak, who's a PhD in psychology. So they're both ACT practitioners, and they're more the sciencey side of it. Whereas even within the yoga, the way that I tend to approach yoga is more from, let's say, an anatomical or biomechanical perspective. And so even the way that I teach has some decent science to back it up, although we're starting to see more and more and more these days is like how science can inform movement, right? But most of the stuff that was cited from them is coming from other ACT sources. So the creator, one of the co-founders of ACT as a therapy, is Stephen Hayes, and he's out of, I think, Reno, Nevada. So he runs a research center there where they basically just take all of the components of that particular type of therapy and just research the crap out of them all the time, like tons of focus groups and double-blind research, and yeah.
Case studies are not the most scientific, but they're super fun. What's an example of yoga really positively impacting someone's life that you've witnessed?
That I've witnessed?
Yeah.
On a really basic level, like even somebody that comes to yoga class for the first time, like if they have walked around for a long time in a body but not feeling a body, which is totally the case for a lot of people, where they're in a body but they're constantly stuck in their mind, is I've had people come up to me after class. Like I was reading actually a memory that came up on Facebook of one guy who, I forget how long ago, maybe like 2 years ago, and he came to my class, and I didn't know who he was at first. He introduced himself at the beginning of class, and then he practiced. And the way that I teach is very body focused. So I tend not to talk about like, although I do talk about spirituality, I tend not to talk about like floofy spirituality type stuff, like let in the joy and breathe out the suffering. Although that's totally viable technique if you want to use stuff like that. But the way that I teach is much more geared to like, let's feel this body part move in relationship to this body part. Maybe only go so far that body part stays moving and other body parts don't get involved. And he came up to me after class and he was like, sort of said something to the effect of, wow, I've never been so in my body. And then he said, I was really afraid to come here. I thought I was going to hate it, but he's like, I loved it. And then he did this gesture where he took his water bottle and pretended like it was an erect penis. And then he said Boner City. And I was like, awesome. Awesome, Boner City. So, and then he keeps coming back. He's just always coming back to yoga, but he spends so long in a body, but not feeling a body. And then it was like, it was so impactful that apparently he got an erection. And I was like, I'm glad that I can do that for you.
As long as he's just feeling his own body, I think that's fine. Yeah. Keep an eye on that guy.
And as long as it's just a water bottle erection and not a full-on
exactly.
penile erection.
Well, you know what? People can't always control what their bodies do. You
That's
just
true.
excuse yourself, or
I remember being a 13-year-old boy.
Yes.
In jogging pants.
Yeah, in jogging pants. Why did I think these were a good idea?
Everybody said stop wearing jogging pants.
Oh, see, now we're clipping again. We're speaking so reasonably, and then we get all fired up about boners. Yeah, that's really funny. I was expecting something like, oh man, I went back to school. I was able to focus. But Boner City,
City.
That's where we took that.
I'm not giving you your classic cliched yoga stories here.
One thing I have written down is like a bullet point with multiple bullet points, because that's just how my mind works. But namaste is the goodbye pen. Namaste. I came to yoga. I guess I didn't initially. My grandma always did yoga. Actually,
cool.
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit, which is really funny because my grandmother from my dad's side, who was a very avid yoga practitioner, was also a very hardcore Catholic.
Oh, cool.
So it was really interesting.
That's a good juxtaposition.
Yeah, exactly, because her bar for what you would call blasphemy was incredibly low. and you know, like if this is the bar, my left hand is really low for the listeners at home. And now my right hand is coming up way above it.
At least a foot.
Yeah. Namaste. Ohms. What else have we got there? Those are just you'll find those in any yoga class.
For the most part, yeah.
You take it a little further, you get stories about
Ganesh and Shiva, Hanuman.
Exactly. Drinking the universe milk and whatnot. Right. And it was pretty interesting that my grandmother, who thought, anything was blasphemy, right? There's probably like 75 items in this room that would have given her a heart attack. but she still practiced yoga because there's so much to it. So I guess the question I'm getting to is, it's a practice that's so old and so deeply rooted in this mythology and something like religion, but a little
bit more flexible.
A little more flexible. Yeah, exactly.
For lack of a better term.
How do you deal, and how do you think people in general are dealing with the balance of the kind of empirical, evidence-based benefits of the practice versus the,
pseudo-religio spiritual side of things?
Exactly, which is an essential part of it.
Yeah. So the good thing is that there's tons of research being done on even the history of yoga, and we're finding out things these days that we had no idea were happening. I think there's a book called The Roots of Yoga, which was written by Mark Singleton and another guy whose name I can never remember. And they're both doing hardcore research, like digging up old texts and stuff like that. And one of the things that they talk about in the book Roots of Yoga is that, and this is a big debate, especially in social media forums, of is yoga Hinduism? Because there's a lot of people out there, no offense to any of you, I don't want to step on any toes, who will claim that yoga is Hinduism and it belongs to India. But what we actually see in the research is that yoga predates Hinduism. What? Yeah, exactly. So there were yoga practices being done before there was a collective religion of Hinduism. And because yoga came up in India, they kind of get attached, right? That there's certain forms of yoga that are going to look more at Hindu mythology and stuff like that. But not all forms of yoga did that. But when yoga sort of comes here and it gets generalized, and we might even say it gets watered down, that some of the different aspects of practice, even historical aspects, kind of get jammed into one thing. And so that's one of the great things about Roots of Yoga is it really starts to break apart some of what we just inherently start to clump together when yoga comes over to us. Right. So talking about how old yoga is, talking about how even when we talk about something like yoga philosophy, how yoga philosophy has changed through the years, that when what we might first call an introduction text-wise to yoga, like when yoga first starts being written about, that style of yoga is different than, let's say, the style of yoga 100, 200, 300 years later. That it's continuously gone through like a shaping and a reshaping and a changing. So that the yoga, when we say yoga philosophy these days, it's like, oh, yoga philosophy, but that's a huge umbrella that has a bunch of different layers underneath of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it intersected with Hinduism, but then it also, there's this like really heavy Taoist element to it.
Yeah.
That I'm not, like when I study Taoism, I don't see yoga in it, but I see somehow that Zen philosophy has come back to it. And then, so it's like you get like three major religions like Buddhism, Taoism, and Hindu that all seem to work their way into the yoga philosophy.
Yep.
Which I think is also kind of the most, I always think of Bruce Lee in his construction of Jeet Kune Do. His philosophy was to take that which is useful and discard which is what's useless.
Yeah.
And that's kind of yoga, but for like peace and wellness, right?
Yeah.
Instead of like kicking people's brains.
Yeah. And like if you start to look at some of the background of even like, what's the word that I'm looking for? A way of learning. Is it epistemology? Is that the term? Let's say it's epistemology, and somebody can fact check me on that.
I would love it if someone fact check. If this podcast had haters, that would be crazy. That would be awesome. That's not what epistemology means, you idiot.
You're such a dummy.
Yeah.
So when we start to look at even some of the bases or the ground points of yoga philosophy is that a big thing almost throughout every yoga philosophy is how does one know what they know? That the sort of like the inherent function of yoga philosophy was not necessarily to like be good and connected all the time and like throw flowers at everybody, sort of like it is here in the West. And like, I'm just going to put on a mala beads and some booty shorts and I'm going to sweat my balls off and get something. But a lot of it was looking at how do we know what we know? What do our senses take in? What kind of proof do we have? Where does imagination play in that? Where do we get our sources? Who are the sources? That's all a big part of yoga philosophy is like, how do we know what we know? How are we learning what we're learning? And sort of like what you were saying was strip away some of the stuff that's not needed and useless and really like, let's keep the stuff that's helpful. And then the cool thing is that through time, as yoga philosophy has changed, it's even been sometimes of, in this period, I'm going to choose to cut that out and keep this. And then in later periods, it's like, oh, maybe that was actually really helpful. And we kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's bring that aspect of practice back a couple centuries later. Mm-hmm. So there's always like picking up and dropping and picking back up and then dropping what we thought was a good idea before. And then it turns out it's not a good idea now. So there was a lot of, even though yoga might be classified sometimes as a pseudoscience, which I hear about that all the time, that there was some hard scientific method to it, right? There was theories about things. There was kinds of ways to test them. There was peer review and then change, right?
Yes. That's when I went down this YouTube rabbit hole on Chinese medicine and Ayurveda a little while back, and
I like Ayurveda.
There was this kind of PowerPoint presentation from a medical doctor who kind of shifted his focus towards looking more at these ancient medicines, and he was talking about how these practices are like the earliest texts collecting data of like which herbs helped with what and which didn't are as old as 10,000 years old. There's, these ancient recordings of what people did, and it's not as they're not controlling all their variables, obviously, because they don't know about that, but there's also something to be said about these things that withstand the test of time. And he says that just like the useless stuff would naturally just kind of fall off. It's like, okay, like this guy died every time we gave him potion X. We're not going to use potion X anymore.
Right.
So over 10,000 years of that, to use with the babies in the bathwater, maybe don't throw that away. Maybe come back to that. And I think a lot of people are doing that.
Put it on a back shelf for a bit.
Yeah.
Pick it back up when it's applicable.
Yeah. And coming back to the thing I started with, so like that was right. So grandma, scary because blasphemy,
orthodox,
and then so I kind of I maybe like participated in it with her to like whatever degree a 6-year-old can, focus on yoga for like I was like, this is boring. But it was always in the back of my mind that she changed her standards for this because she found so much benefit to it. And then later on, the first time I seriously did yoga and focused on it was actually in P90X. The DVD series.
Tony Horton, is that the guy? Tony Horton? Yeah.
Oh man, the guy's awesome. Such an inspiration to me. and in the yoga DVD that came with it, he's explaining even the scientific benefit of doing the ohms, that you're kind of vibrating your body, and it massages your central nervous system. What, pseudoscience?
Bro
That's the pseudoscience.
bro science. That's bro science.
There you go. But still found it very beneficial, and it was it was harder than the other ones too. That was really bothersome. I'm like, this is bullshit. This is like my option for the rest day, and I'm doing stuff that's harder than the other DVD.
Because it's different, right? Like when you're doing the P90X workouts, it's like it's primarily strength training, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he throws in like flow yoga at you, where not only do you have to have a certain amount of strength, but you also have to have a certain amount of mobility to do that stuff. Like especially with the P90X version, where it's like lots of stamina type movements. Or I think he was even doing like a side angle pose with like binding around the back and stuff like that.
I remember dancer's pose was in there. Yeah. There was, I think, wheel or plow. Plow was in there.
Plow up, legs up over the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was the longest one too. It was
it a 90-minute session?
Yeah,
90 minutes.
So that was where I first like actually did it and focused on it, and didn't find it super hokey.
Yeah.
And then when I went to a class for the first time, maybe a few years after that, I was like I'm not gonna say these things that I don't know what they mean. Namaste being one of them, but it's such a beautiful sentiment. The light in me recognizes and honors the light in you. That's so
nice.
Like I can
not
get behind saying that.
Exactly, right?
And so is there anything you would add to someone who might be, I don't know, they might feel like they would experience some sort of culture shock in a class?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of them is some of the language that gets used. So depending on the teacher, they might be describing postures using Sanskrit. And then you're like, I don't know what the hell a Baddha Konasana is.
Yeah.
So there's that, which is just the language thing. And then, coming across like at the end of a class, if a teacher decides to, because not every teacher does say namaste at the end of class. And more teachers are actually starting to get away from doing it because of this whole conversation about cultural appropriation. But again, like I say it because I like the sentiment of it. I even have a slightly different translation where at the end of class, before I'll say namaste, I'll put my hands in heart center and I'll say, it's always an honor. And for me, that's what namaste is it's always an honor. It's never not an honor, right? It's either everything is shit, and so we got to respect that everything is shit, or everything is a blessing, and we respect that everything is a blessing. And so for me, there's that. But when I first went to yoga class and I heard namaste, I didn't say it at first because I had no idea what it meant. But I'm also very curious, and I like to do research. So as soon as I heard it, I came home and I was like, Google namaste. And then it gave me a list of like all of these things that namaste could mean. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I can say that. And depending, especially if I'm in the context of a yoga class, like if I go over to Montreal and somebody says, bonjour, I might say hi, but I might also say bonjour, which means hi.
Yeah.
But it's not my original language. I speak a little bit of French, but not very much.
They don't say bonjour, and that's why they switch to English as soon as you say it.
or they don't like the way that I'm hacking up French.
Well, that's what my friend just told me. I was like, man, I'm so bad at French that I can't even say hello without them instantly switching to English for me. And they're like, that's because they don't say bonjour, they say salut.
Salut. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Like a lot of coffee shops in Montreal, I get bonjours. So I'll say bonjour. And then they'll be like, parle français. And I'll be like, petit pas. Oui, petit pas. And that's as far as I go, is saying I know a little bit of French. I know a little bit, not much. I can order eggs and shrimp. And if you need me to point you to the bathroom, I can do that.
Yeah.
I also know the word for tie.
Tie.
Cravat.
Yeah.
I know colors. But yeah, like it can definitely be a culture shock sometimes because that's really like that's where yoga comes from. And so there's going to be a part of that. To go back to your grandma's story, is that if yoga isn't traditionally Hinduism, if it's actually a practice that predates that, then it kind of leaves an open stage for, this is what I love about yoga, is yoga can really, to a certain degree, keeping lineages and air quotes tradition in mind, that it can kind of be whatever you make it. Like even these days, there's a big conversation about what is yoga and what is not yoga as far as physical practice is concerned. So you have especially a hardcore amount of evidence popping up these days that strength training is good for everybody. Like everybody really needs to be doing strength training. Mm-hmm. And so you have a group of teachers, myself included, who are starting to bring more strength training type movements into practice. Kendall does it all the time. And so with that, you're going to get a group of people that are like, well, that's not yoga. I'll be like, well, what is yoga? Especially if we start to go back, like way, way back. What we call asana or the posture practice in yoga, that's not originally a part of yoga. That like the original asanas were just seated meditative practice. Like it was sitting postures. And then the asana didn't come until much later on.
And the idea of that was to exhaust the body so it wouldn't.
Sometimes, yeah. Like some lineages have taken in that route, but a lot of the yoga movements and the postures that were developed were to allow a body to sit in seated meditation for longer periods of time, right? Especially if we look at old school yoga, like really original practices, it had sort of what we would call an up and out mentality or transcendent mentality, which isn't too far off of like Judeo-Christian sort of beliefs where it's like, I kind of want to get out of this life to get to something better. Even ideas of like, this body's kind of cruddy and it's a hindrance and I need to purify it so I can get to something better. That original yoga practices were very much like that. That there's what we would even call mortification practices, like standing on one leg in the desert sun, staring up at the sun for like an hour. Or like people always like cringe when they hear me say this, but there's even these days people doing mortification practices.
That's the trend of 2019.
Yeah, staring at the sun in tree pose for an hour.
Yeah.
But there's one guy I saw a video of not too long ago. There's a big sort of get together in India called the Kumbh Mela, where a bunch of air quotes masters and practitioners come together. And one guy's practice is to take his penis and wrap it around the sword and then roll the sword up. So his penis kind of looks like a fruit roll up on the sword. And then he steps each of his legs over the sword to hold it in place. And that's his practice. Right? So then it's like, I always wonder, like, if that's his practice and he comes over to like De La Soul Yoga and sees us doing up dog and he's like, that's not yoga.
Amateurs.
Yeah. I don't see any penises or swords here. What you guys are doing is not yoga. So then the big question sometimes is these days is like, what is yoga? If it's always been changing, then what is it now? Oh. Right? Does it have to stay the way that it was?
So with that roots of yoga, is there evidence that it kind of something like it popped up kind of independently in different regions of the world, or can it all be traced to a single source?
No, and that's like when you were talking about sort of the relationship or the confluence between, let's say, like Taoism and Buddhism and yoga, is that you have these people in different parts of the world at, let's say, generally the same kind of timeline. And they're kind of learning the same things at the same time, right? So I think that's super cool, is that it wasn't like one group of people did it in India and then they just traveled out and shared it with everybody. Although there is parts of that, like especially if we look at Buddhism, like that's how Buddhism traveled from India to. The thinking is that it went from India and then just traveled east. But apparently these days, it's within the research is that it kind of took a jog up towards like Afghanistan area, and then made its way to like China, Japan, and stuff like that.
Whoa.
So I think that's super cool, is that you'll have practices in areas like Afghanistan where they're doing very yoga-ish type practices, but that we didn't think before that was part of the travel route, that we just thought, well, okay, India, China. So yeah, it's been happening all over the place. Like even when you were talking about Ayurveda, there are older Greek and Roman practices that are very much Ayurvedic style practices of just like tuning into the body, recognizing what kind of season we're in, what are the herbs that are available? What can we use them for? And still, again, like trial and error, like how many people had to die taking that before you figure out that's not the way to go?
Yeah.
So it's kind of been happening, right? Like even within the context of Ayurveda, North American Indians are doing the same kind of thing, right?
If it's true and it works and it's something that kind of you can access within your own mind and body, inevitably people are going to discover it.
Absolutely.
Let's not go there yet. Ooh. There's a thing that you said in a class.
Oh, no.
I was really offended. No. You were talking about your perceptions of things and what the things actually are, and how nothing projects. I was joking about the offended thing. It's just something that I've been mulling over since you said it. Like nothing projects everything that it is, and you can't perceive even everything that the thing's projecting, let alone what it is and what it represents. And that's something that you can just kind of sit with for ages. Is that a type of meditation? Or like, do you ever like contemplate an idea as a meditation instead of just trying to...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that, like, with, let's say, meditative practice, like when I'm teaching workshops, I always start pretty much every workshop by saying dozens of lineages, hundreds of different practices. And so the ones that sort of filter into the West that we're familiar with are like, close your eyes, sit cross-legged, close your eyes, feel your breathing. When you recognize that you're not feeling your breathing, come back to your breathing, which is one style of practice. It's more of like a building up attention or concentration style practice. But there's a reason why, especially in a lot of circles, meditative practice is known as contemplative practice, where as attention begins to stabilize, you can then begin to more fully contemplate how things are working and the way that things are. But it requires a certain amount of stabilization of attention, because if you just sit cross-legged and then a thought pops into your mind, chances are you're probably just going to follow that train of thought. And then 30 minutes later, your bell goes off and you're like, where am I? I was just wrapped up in a 30-minute conversation that started with a picture of a brown dog in my mind.
Yeah.
And so as attention gets more stable through practices like feeling the breath, getting distracted, coming back, things can pop up in the mind, and rather than getting distracted about them, we can actually begin to contemplate them. Like even in Christianity, there's these days even there's a Christian contemplative practice where it's not really about just going to church and doing Hail Marys and stuff like that. It's like sitting by yourself sometimes, maybe using a rosary as a way to focus your attention, and then just really contemplating, like, I don't know, relationships with God, if that's sort of like where you want to go. But yeah, depending on the session that I'm doing and sort of like what's in my life, it's not uncommon for me to just, like, once my attention is stable, just to contemplate an idea and be like, how is this going to play out? The thing that I talk about in class and what I'll usually say, like almost verbatim, is like, let's say we're going to do the clap the hands technique that I sometimes do. And then you feel
paradiddles.
No, not paradiddles. No, I've dropped paradiddle meditation.
That's for yoga too.
Yeah, it's for yoga for drummers, and that's it.
Yeah.
One of the techniques that I'll use, I call it the clap, and then it usually gets a little bit of a laugh around the room. It's like somebody's like, "I don't want the clap," and so we'll clap our hands pretty loudly, and then you separate the hands, and then the idea is just to feel the sensation happening in the hands. And I'm not going to say for everybody, because some people are very sensation-based people, but for a lot of people, you'll do something like clap the hands, you're feeling a sensation, and then all of a sudden the mind starts to put a bunch of descriptors on it, like hot, tingly. Sometimes I'll even ask students to rate the sensation on intensity level from like 1 to 10, and then notice how the sensation begins to degrade the longer you keep your hands apart. And then I'll say something like, the way that you describe your hands to yourself is not the feeling of your hands. The feeling of the hands is the feeling of the hands. Or some people are very image-based, so they're trying to feel their hands, and more so what they're connecting to is an image of their hands in their mind. And I would say, that's not your hands either. So the picture that you have of your hands in your mind, that's not your hands. The language that you use to describe the sensation is not the sensation. And then I'll gear them towards like, well, what is the sensation? All language dropped away. What is the actual sensation? Rather than what is my perception of the sensation, or what kind of language do I put on it? And that kind of happens normally in certain meditative techniques. Like one that's very popular in Zen practice is known as anapanasati, which is just feeling your breath moving in and moving out. And the idea is you don't want to mess with your breath at all. So you're not trying to make it deep or long. You're just letting your breath do what it wants to do. And
that's hard to do.
It is very hard to do. It's very hard to just pay attention to something and not try to make it something else, not try to make it what you want. And so part of that contemplation automatically pops up in a practice like that.
I'm consciously breathing right now. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. But like, that's one of the big realizations that I've had within anapanasati practice, because that's my primary practice, is just feeling breath, let it do its thing, and notice what I notice. And along with some of the teachings that I've gotten from teachers in the past, alluding to this idea that the feeling of my breath is not the way that I describe my breath to myself. It's just to simply feel the breath and notice what it does. And a lot of the times you'll get really deep contemplative insight as a byproduct of just letting things be the way that they are. Right? Because if I can let something be the way that it is, I'm probably going to learn more about that thing. Right? Like, I'm going to learn more about, I don't know, snow leopards by just watching a snow leopard do the thing that it does by itself, rather than I'm probably not going to learn too much about snow leopards and how they work by grabbing a snow leopard and putting it in a lab. And I might learn something like how it's built if I decide to dissect it or something. But
that's funny that you mentioned looking at snow leopards. There's this thing I read a little while ago about, I think I can use a little more volume. I haven't clipped yet, and my waveforms are looking pretty small. This is what they call bad radio. Chinese, like, watercolor artists who practice that. A great part of the education of that, the focus, they say, is to study the rhythm of things. That people will, when they're learning, they'll say, like, look at the bamboo. It's too big to be a shrub, but it doesn't seem like a tree. Whatever you call a bunch of bamboo growing, they say, like, watch the rhythm. And that's, you're not trying to copy the shape of the thing, because something gets lost when you're, say if you look at a photograph and you try to reproduce it, they try to mimic, like, the essence of the thing.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah.
Or like when you paint a bird, right? It doesn't, and when you look at that stuff, it looks alive, and there's something really magical about paintings that you can't get from a photograph. And I don't know, just the rhythm of,
I like that idea.
Life.
I really like that idea.
It's cool, right?
Yeah, that you're going to learn about the thing by, like, you're going to learn about calligraphy by watching bamboo.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
From my understanding of Zen practice is kind of recognizing that suffering is inevitable, and by all means life could be ultimately meaningless, and finding peace with this. Do you find yourself searching for meaning, or do you feel like, do you subscribe to this Zen thing where, like, how do you balance,
Do I have to censor myself on your podcast?
No.
That's fucking heavy. That's a heavy question.
So that's why I looked at that and I was
That's
like,
why it's in all bold caps on your page.
Remember when I was like, not yet. And then you talked about a bit about the perceptions and stuff, and I was like, okay, now.
I would describe myself more as a Zen practitioner. It's sort of where I've landed and found the most comfort. I will say that especially from a Zen perspective, we are meaning making machines. That's what we do. Like, we make the meaning. Not that the meaning is inherent in anything. Everything is just the way that it is, which is a very sort of like Taoist way to think about things. It's like the way is just the way. The way has always been the way, and the way will continue to be the way. And we find ways to put meaning on that, right? That this means this and that means that. And I'm sort of, let's say, pseudo over meaning. There's always going to be a part of me that I think, like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
But maybe part of my Zen practice is allowing me to drop that away and just to be with things the way that they are, right? And yet at the same time, it's like I'm also really into developmental psychology because I have 2 little kids. And so, like, one of the things that I was first learning before my son was born was if you've ever seen a kid and a parent, like about 5-6 months ish, when the child is on like say standing on the parent's lap and holding the hands, and they start to lean back, and they'll lean back as much as they can before they feel like something's going to give, that's them sort of discovering that they're separate from somebody else. So there is kind of a meaning there, right? Like, the meaning is them finding an ego, like they're finding a separate self. So there's meaning behind the action, even when the meaning isn't superimposed on it, if that makes any sense.
I heard that there's some evidence that for the first little bit, babies don't know that their mother is a separate entity.
They don't, yeah. For like the first few months, and that's them practicing. Like, okay, how far can I get away from you before I feel like I'm unsafe? But for the first little while, the baby doesn't even know that the boob is different from them.
Yeah,
right.
And I mean, in a lot of ways, it's not, because it's if they don't have that boob, they're not going to be around much longer.
Well, and especially if you think about like in utero, where there was no separation, that the mom is the baby is the mom, because everything that they share is so intimate. And so when the baby comes out, it's I feel like it's kind of just natural that the same relationship is still there. They have to learn that there's a separation, that they're not the same person as the mom. And I like that idea of the leaning back, is that's kind of them practicing that, right? Like figuring out where do you end and where do I start, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, when I think about something like that, there is kind of a meaning in that, but not a meaning that we're trying to like, this means this, but there is sort of an inherent meaning feeling, like a feeling of a meaning behind it.
It's like the more you sit and zoom out, the less everything matters. Like, even something as massive as like Genghis Khan taking over however much of, the continents that he conquered, like, what does that matter now?
Exactly.
Like 20% of people have his DNA. Who gives a shit?
But it's still kind of cool. It's like if you do your DNA testing and you're like, Mongolian? Where did that come from? Apparently he had a lot of
the
sex.
odds are high. Yeah,
that you're related to Genghis Khan. But I don't know. I don't so much search for meaning these days.
I think you'll just hurt yourself, really.
Yeah.
I think, you can either be okay with not having any, or find some convenient answer that you don't want to poke holes in, because it will.
For sure. Yeah.
It will not stand up to scrutiny no matter what it is.
Like, even in the Yoga Sutras, which is a sort of a very classical yoga text, one one of my teachers, a man by the name of Matthew Remsky, did what he calls like a remix of it. He didn't want to call it a retranslation or his impressions of it, but like a remix. And so one of the lines in the Yoga Sutra, and I forget like what one of the original translations was, but his translation was, or his remix of it was, death devalues life. And the sort of the unpacking of that was, and this was sort of like a pretty classic teaching in Buddhism, is that all of this time searching for meaning in death, or like what's going to happen after I die, devalues the process of living. Like we spend so much time trying to figure out what's going to happen in the end as a way to maybe alleviate suffering. And then the Buddha kind of looked at that and was like, well, it seems like that's creating a lot more suffering than it's relieving. Like, let's drop some of that. Right? And it's like in certain Buddhist texts or commentaries, it's like the Buddha really didn't say that he did or did not believe in a God, but he just thought all of those questions about the meaning of God and the afterlife kept taking you away from the life that you were living. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Like for me, that's brilliant. For somebody else, it's like, no, I need to contemplate death.
No, you need to tell me what to do.
I've seen flatliners. You can come back.
Do I eat the shrimp or not?
Yeah, that's a heavy question, man.
Do you, like, I teach music to people from, I think I've had a few students who are in their 70s, and I've had a few as young as 4.
Cool.
Right? So
that's a big range.
Yeah, it's a very big range. And there's this kind of prevalent, like, existential dread in Gen Z. It's not even dread. It's like this, like, weird, almost comical, but secretly sad kind of, like, I don't know. Do you, I guess, like, you probably don't have a lot of interaction with people in like that 7 to 13 range, right?
More and more these days.
More,
especially being a dad
yeah.
of a 4.5-year-old. Like I'm hanging out with a lot of 4.5-year-olds these days. And then I have nieces and nephews. So that range from anywhere from, I think, like 9 to 13.
Yeah.
So I do have some interactions in those ranges, but not so much within the world of yoga and meditation. Like I don't teach kids yoga. But yeah, so some of those earlier ranges, I'm not having conversations or doing practices with people of that age.
Oh, okay. But just what I was getting at is that there's like, I think with kind of like the internet culture, and it's that age when, kids start getting devices and stuff like that. And there's this like weird, like gallows humor that seems to be really prevalent among like tweens right now, which is something you'd expect from, I don't know, like a deep sea fisherman who, sees someone fall overboard trying to reel in some Atlantic crab like every other day.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, sometimes I'll be like, wow, this is surprisingly like wise. And other times I'll be like, are you okay? And man, shit, like what is that? I don't expect you to have the answer, but
I don't know that I do have an answer of that. I think especially within the technological age that we're in, it's really easy for young kids to get their hands on older information.
Yeah.
Like with my son being 4.5, and I'm the kind of, and I'm sure I might take some flack for this if you have haters on your page, like on your podcast.
Not yet.
I don't think iPads are evil. I think an iPad is a tool that you can pick up and do really great things with, and that at some point you need to learn how to put it down. But my son, when he's allowed to, really loves YouTube. And on occasion we found him watching things that were far too mature for him to be watching. And then he would say,
because it'll just autoplay.
Oh yeah. And it's just like one video after the other, or even some of the videos that are completely appropriate for him, like let's say he's watching some Paw Patrol, but in the side scroll bar, something pops up that's like not Paw Patrol.
There's like this like erotic fan fiction, like
the one day we caught him watching a video of Spider-Man peeing on Elsa from Frozen, and I was like what is this? Well, like, this is inappropriate for you.
Yeah, but
don't start peeing.
The algorithms are just like, oh, you like Spider-Man? You like Frozen?
Yeah, you're gonna like Spider-Man peeing on Elsa.
Yeah.
But then, like, sometimes he'll say something that he's seen in a video, or like living in the city, like he's constantly exposed to conversations that are maybe inappropriate for somebody his age to be hearing, and he'll pick it up and he'll start using some of the language, and he kind of understands what some of it is, but there's like the subtle nuances that I don't think he really gets. And I think some of those subtle nuances, like younger kids are being like crazy rugged offshoremen without noticing some of the subtle nuances of what it is that they're doing.
Right.
That there's some stuff in there that we get things. that they do it, but they don't get it.
Yeah, like all the jokes in the Simpsons that I'm only getting now.
Yeah, or when I'm watching like what did we watch recently with my son? Wreck-It Ralph. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah,
it's fucking hilarious.
Really good.
There's a scene in I don't know if you know that there's a scene in the movie when they have to build the car, her first car. Vanellope's first car, and she's like, now some frosting, and he's like, how much frosting? And she says, a buttload of frosting. I'm like, is that appropriate for a kid's cartoon movie? And then all of a sudden my son's just like, I don't know, like a couple of days later we were asking him about something, like, how much ketchup do you want? And he's like, a buttload of ketchup. I'm like, what did you just say? And it was hilarious, but he doesn't know what a buttload means.
Yeah.
Right? Like he has no context for that.
Like
I just want a buttload of ketchup. How much is... And then I'll be like,
of measurement.
How much is a buttload of ketchup, Ellis?
4-year-old, huh?
Yeah. He's awesome. I love having the kids.
You said you're having some cool Latin jams with them.
Yeah.
You're giving them a güiro and
yeah. I have like a percussion. We live in an apartment, so I don't have a room to set up my drum set. But I've got a little jungle kit that I made in the closet that's torn down. So it's like a 14-inch bass drum, and then I'll have like a snare. Off the bass drum, I'll have a cymbal, and then that's pretty much it. Just so I can practice patterns if ever I get the chance. But then I also have a couple really nice congas in the apartment and a big Pelican case full of percussion stuff, and he loves it. So he'll pull it out, and he sees me play all the time. So I'll like put on a track, and I'll get a cowbell out and just start playing cowbell along to a track, and he sees that. So then he's like, "Oh, can I do it?" So yeah, we'll have like little Latin jams where I'll play some cowbell and his sister will play some go-go bells, and he'll like jam on the güiro for a bit. Then we scream at each other, and it's really funny.
Nice.
He's a lot of fun.
Do you have him listening to metal yet?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. He listens to everything. Like right now, like we were talking about Snarky Puppy a little bit earlier, and Snarky Puppy's like one of his favorite bands right now.
Yeah.
So he likes funk and he likes jazz, and sometimes he'll listen to metal. What has he been listening to lately? I don't know if they're still around, but there was a Hamilton band called Threat Signal. Do you remember Threat Signal?
Oh yeah, Kyle McKnight, their guitar player from Under Reprisal, the first album. He was.
I don't know him, but there was a guy who was in Mohawk when I was there. It was the third year when I was first year. Yeah, third year when I was first year. And he played for Threat Signal, but I forget what his name was.
What instrument?
He was guitar, had big, thick dreads.
Oh, okay. Oh.
But I know that he was in Threat Signal for at least a little bit. But yeah, Ellis is really into Threat Signal, which I'm very excited about. We listened to some Dillinger Escape Plan together. He seems to like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dillinger goes over my head. That's cool. That's
I don't think he gets it. But like when we're listening
to he gets it.
Like when we're listening to 43% Burnt, I'm pretty sure he's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Like,
he's just like noise.
He's just like, I like this. It's a way to get out this feeling.
Have you ever seen that video where this guy's filming his kids sleeping in the car. He's like in like a little booster seat and sleeping, and he puts on Breed by Nirvana. You've seen it?
I have seen it.
And the drum fill comes in, and the kid just starts like waving his arms with the snare drum.
So good. Just like sleeping kid.
Yeah.
So just embedded in who he is now,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Ellis likes Nirvana too.
Nice.
His favorite Nirvana song is In Bloom. Yeah. Yeah, he likes that one. Which is fun. Like the story about that is funny because he was watching a video on YouTube and there was a background track of a cover of that. And so he had never actually heard the real song. And we were driving one day and I was listening to 102.1 and that song came on and he was like, Daddy, this song, I like this song. And I was like, where have you heard this song from? And he's like, YouTube. And so when we got home, he showed me the video and it was a completely different rendition of the song, but he recognized the lyrics.
Whoa.
I was like, that's yours. Clever.
Yeah.
And then he's like, can you find me the one from the car? And I was like, yeah, for sure I can find you. I just got to find my CDs and
Yeah.
you'll have it. And so now he's like really into that, like really into Nirvana. And what else does he like right now? Gob. He likes Gob.
Really?
Yeah. I kind of got him into Gob because he also really likes, as a 4.5-year-old, he, for some reason, he really likes zombies and anything to do with sort of like, not gore, but like
Okay.
horror, like vampires, zombies and stuff like that. And so as a way to trick him into listening to good music,
Yeah.
I'll find videos that maybe have some stuff like that in their videos. So like, I Hear You Calling, the Gob video is like
Yeah.
them playing
In
soccer
the
against
stadium.
zombies, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, watch this video. And he loved the video. And now he just listens to the song because he references the video.
Isn't that so funny what does and doesn't scare kids? Mm-hmm. It's something like zombies or whatever. I remember when I was a kid, the Falcor from Neverending Story.
Yeah.
Loved that movie. But anytime, which was most of the movie, anytime he's on screen, I would run out of the room.
I'm outta here.
And then I would like peek around the corner and be like, oh, he's still there. Dogs aren't supposed to be that big.
Or pink or fly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really weird. Like with Ellis, was it 2 years ago? At Festival of Friends at Gage Park, they have a haunted house there every year.
Mm-hmm.
And we went there and for some reason he was like, Daddy, can we do the haunted house? I was like, I don't know if you know what's going to be in there. The good thing was in the afternoon, it's kind of kid friendly.
Yeah.
So there's no hands reaching out of the wall to grab you. But we were walking through and we walk into this one room where there's a girl who's dressed up as a zombie. She starts screaming at you and she just starts screaming at both of us. And Ellis is just like, hi, zombie girl. And it's dark and there's a strobe light flashing, which you think would be disorienting.
Yeah.
And he's just like, oh, this is cool. And there's like dolls on the beds with their heads cut off and they're covered in blood, like baby dolls.
These people have a lot of toys.
They do. That's exactly the thing. And then she starts yelling, get out of my house. He's like, okay, bye, zombie girl. And yet we have friends and their daughter doesn't even like low droning music in a film because she'll get freaked out by it. So you put like a low droning string and she's like, what's wrong? This is creepy. And he'll watch like, I don't know, he'll watch zombie stuff on TV and it doesn't even faze him. He's like totally about it.
And then like one day you're just like at the mall and someone's dressed up as like a Paw Patrol character and he's like, oh, he's too big. I didn't think he'd be that big. He's crying.
When we went to see Santa, that's the thing. Yeah. We went to see Santa
Claus
this year. He was all about Santa until we got there and he saw him and he was like, nope, I'm not doing it. So he'll go into a haunted house with zombie people in it, but he won't go see Santa Claus. That's so strange.
Actually, low droning music reminded me of this. I even brought it up once with when I was talking to my buddy Leo, but last week or something, I was at one of your classes and you put on like a singing bowl shavasana track or something like that, and there was some drilling going on outside.
Yeah.
And the two sounds were harmonizing so beautifully, and I never again will hear something like that because it was just a complete cosmic coincidence that,
Right.
Those two pitches happened to coincide in a way that was
Super
that I
cool.
found pleasant. At least.
Yeah.
I mean,
Which is also interesting because not the construction with the singing bowls, but there are certain students that I'll get flack about playing that track because like the low droning bowls make them feel uncomfortable.
Probably gives them diarrhea.
Something like, I gotta take a poop. Or there's this one that I'll usually play. That's it sounds like low Tibetan monk chanting and then some like string work in the background. And I remember I had it on class one day and I was walking around and one woman caught my attention and she's like, "Can you shut this off? It's giving me heart palpitations." I was like, "Okay, I will shut it off." And at the end of the class, somebody else came up and was like, "Oh, why did you shut off that chanting? It was so beautiful." I was like, "Well, I didn't want that person to have a heart attack."
You actually, two things that I get that because when they hit the bowls, I hate it.
Oh,
I don't like the sound, the rubbing sound. I'll listen to all day, but the ting. It just
is it like startling?
No, it enrages me. It's not even like a fear response; it's an anger response.
Why are you hitting it?
Yeah, it sounds so much nicer the other way. So
probably don't get into listening to gongs then, because gongs are.
Oh no, gongs are fine because that's
really?
what they're for.
I don't like gongs. When we were in yoga teacher training, our teacher was big into gongs, and she played a gong track one time for Shavasana. I was like, I had to plug my ears. It was so irritating.
Yeah, it's weird. I used to get, if you get like anxiety attacks, you can get you can kind of feel it coming on, and oddly enough, the music of the Deftones used to do that to
that's
me.
interesting.
Like I would just, it would make my heart beat different, and it would make me really. And now it's like, I'm going to do a plug for a show that's going to happen before this podcast comes out. So it's really just like a big fuck you to anyone listening to this because they can't see it.
They can't go.
Yeah. But now like my band's doing a Deftones tribute night on February 2nd. And
I'm going to put that in my phone.
Yeah, Corktown Pub.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, we did it in Brantford, and it was insane because
Feb 2nd, you said?
Yeah, we were like who's even gonna go to this? Like, this is crazy, and it was packed. And
I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah,
people love the Deftones,
right?
I love the Deftones.
Oh man, I've had a spoiler alert. We're gonna play When Girls Telephone Boys, and I've had that riff stuck in my head.
That's good.
It's all good. It's 2 notes.
Doesn't need to be any more notes than that.
Just rumble.
Corktown. Cool. I've been in the Corktown in a while.
Yeah, it's nice. I love that place, man.
It's changed a lot. I remember when I used to go there when I was younger. When I was young, like, we used to play shows there. Like,
it was like a skeezy punk venue.
Oh
where
yeah,
you get
for
stabbed.
sure. And now it's like the sound system there is beautiful.
Yeah,
I love. Do they still have the monitors all in the ceiling?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, they have the, not monitors, but like the mains.
Yeah,
and they have like the massive subwoofers and stuff.
So
and,
good.
Yeah, and not only that, so it like sounds phenomenal when you're up there, but then it's like a long room too, so you can. This ain't Hollywood is like that.
Yeah,
where you can just like walk back and kind of control the volume for yourself. And I find that really cool.
It's good that you don't get heart palpitations over Deftones anymore, though, because that would be tragic.
Yeah, that would be sad. And what was weird is that I liked it at the same time.
Yeah.
But like I could only listen to like 1.5 songs and then I'd have to turn it off. Was it Devin Townsend's Ocean Machine did that to me as well.
I don't know if I've heard that.
It's who
I know.
Strapping
Young Lad.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a big Strapping Young Lad.
Yeah. So I think it might even, it's like different people. But I think if you like went on his Spotify, Ocean Machine would
I would check it out.
At this point be like just under Strapping Young Lad or something like that. But it's kind of like a lot more atmospheric sounding, a lot more, but still, it's still, him, right?
Still awesome. Because he's awesome.
Like that one I just had like a really intense reaction to, and it was weird. I don't know.
See, I find metal to be very soothing.
Yeah, a lot of the times.
Like when if there was this one moment, a mindfulness moment, where I remember I was driving in my car and I was having kind of a bad day, and I forget what I was upset about. And then my go-tos for feeling good are usually either Bob Marley or Sublime. Like if you put those on, I'm like, yes, this is awesome. And I was playing Bob Marley and it was not working. And I was like, okay, what should I put on? And I forget what I put on. It was metal. I want to say it was like maybe something like Slaughtered by Pantera. And as soon as it came on, I was just like, this is exactly what I needed. Like when fast kick pedal comes in and just chunky riffs start playing, I'm like, oh yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing like it. Like if you play me some like Meshuggah, I'm just like, oh God, Meshuggah, thank you.
You a big Vinnie Paul fan?
Yeah, I like Vinny. So I wouldn't put him up there as like one of my favorite drummers, but he's a good guy.
It's weird with him because it's like, it's just his contribution to the music is so flawless that it almost like doesn't matter how proficient he was. Not to say that he was a slouch by any stretch of the imagination, right? But it's just like the way that like Dime's riffs lined up with the drums. Like you can't do anything better for the music than what he was doing.
Yeah, and that was the good thing about it was like if you again, like what you were saying, if you look at how the music was written, is that most of Dimebag's parts are being played on the bass drum, right? That they're constantly syncing up together.
Yeah.
And I think that's just good metal practice. That's just good metal.
Good. Yeah.
That's just good metal. Same thing happens in Meshuggah, right? Like where a lot of the polyrhythmic stuff happens in Meshuggah is like between the guitar and the bass drum, like that they're constantly syncing up, right? Yeah. And it's like, especially with a drummer like Thomas Hake from Meshuggah, where he basically just keeps time solid on his crash cymbal or his hi-hat while he does all of this cool polyrhythmic stuff underneath it. And the guitars are always following that, which I think is cool. Or he's always following the guitars. I don't know, chicken or egg, right?
Yeah.
That's just good practice. That's just good metal.
I was saying in a band practice last week that it upsets me that The Pot by Tool is in 4/4 all the way. I'm like, no,
I will not accept this. Yeah. There needs to be at least 2 more beats in there.
How dare you suggest this?
But then some of their best songs, like Sober's in 4, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, Sober's in 4.
Or on Lateralis, there's like this one like breakdown in The Grudge, I think. That it's like the only 4 groove on the whole album. Yeah. And you're just like, and it's all of a sudden like the time signature that all the music is in sounds brand new to you because for the last like 35 minutes.
Because you've been counting in 6s and 7s and 9s. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a sucker for an odd time signature.
Right? It's beautiful. I mean, I had this realization that I was thinking to myself, everything's either, there's either 2 of it or 3 of it. And that's really it. And then I was like, no, there's only ones. That's the only.
That's very profound,
right?
Every song is
one note.
one
note at a time. Right? This
should make writing charts very difficult.
Yeah, I guess so. It's not. Yeah, it's more of a thought exercise.
Yeah, but it's true, right? Like even from a meditative perspective, like one of the things my teacher used to say is, especially when you're sitting, there's this idea of, okay, I'm going to sit for like, I don't know, 30 minutes. And I'm going to feel every breath. And then partway through the meditation, you're like, oh, I probably got like 15 more minutes left. And he's like, no, don't think about the 15 minutes, just breath by breath by breath. As long as you're focusing on the breath, at some point the timer is going to go off. He's like, you can get so wrapped up in too many breaths. Like, what's 10 breaths from now going to be like? Or, right? Same thing with, I even think like time signatures. That's what I love about Danny Carey's playing, is that when he's playing odd time signatures, I don't know if you know this, whenever they're writing a tune and he's figuring out how to solo on top of an odd time signature, he creates a clave, like an ostinato pattern in his mind. and he's constantly running through that clave as he's playing off of it.
That makes sense.
So he simplifies the time signature by putting an easily accessible rhythm over top of it in his
He's
head.
not thinking of numbers. He's just feeling an accent.
Exactly, right? He's like, whatever the accents are is exactly what he's playing off of. And I think that's super cool. It's a good way to break it down.
What? When did you start playing drums? Was it the first instrument you played?
It was, well, no, organ was the first instrument I ever played. Church organ. Church organ was the first musician.
Why would you start
instrument.
off playing two pianos?
And bass pedals?
Yeah.
Because we had one in our house. So I grew up with an organ in the house.
Oh.
And my sister was actually a very good organ player growing up. She used to play at the church that we would go to. Not that we were very religious people. We were Presbyterian. So it was kind of like you can go if you want to, but you don't have to. It was like my dad's idea of religion was basically just like on Sunday mornings listening to Devil Went Down to Georgia from Charlie Daniels Band. that was his church.
Spiritual tune, I guess.
But because we had the organ in the house, I would always tinker on it, and I've always been into music.
It's such a bullshit lesson about pride in that tune.
It's so true.
Just like this kid was so cocky and everything worked out great for him.
He beat the devil.
Yeah.
And if there's anybody that you're going to beat, it's going to be the devil, right?
Believe in yourself and you can do anything.
You can win a golden violin, golden fiddle.
From Satan
From
himself.
Satan, yeah. But yeah, organ was my first.
Organ.
And I took lessons for a little while. So
That actually seems like a pretty natural transition to drums then, because you're already using all four limbs.
Yeah,
and fingers.
yeah.
It's a step down, really.
Yeah, it really was, because like, what is my other hand doing other than control? Well, I suppose fiddling with knobs and stuff like that, and then you're using one foot to control volume. That was always one of the cool things that I liked about organ, is that with your volume pedal, you can hit notes and then kind of wah them if you
Swell
want
into
to.
them. Yeah.
I also liked the fact that I could not really program, but play drum beats to play to while I was practicing organ stuff. So that was always neat. And then when I was in high school, after I started playing drums, I used to write my own music, and a lot of it was just organ based. I would just doodle around on the organ and play with the bass pedals and stuff. But I didn't find drums until I was 12, I think. I started playing organ when I was like 3 or 4. But I wasn't serious about it. It was it was there in the house, and I liked playing it. And I would just break out one of my sister's sort of like learning textbooks, and I would just try to play along to the best of my ability.
Take any lessons or anything?
I might have taken like 1 or 2 lessons, and then I was like, this isn't for me. Right. Lessons isn't for me. I'm not a lesson kind of kid. I was just like, put me in front of the instrument and I'll learn how to play it, but I don't want to actually like learn how to play it. That's just far too structured for me. Give me a book and I'll teach myself. But yeah, my first drum set I got from was in my uncle's basement. We used to go over there and we would have Christmas and stuff. They had a huge basement, and my cousin's old drum set, which was like a really old Sonar Jazz kit, was stacked over in the corner, just getting rusty. And I don't know what it was about it. I would just walk over to it and I would kind of like tap on some of the skins. I'm like, oh, I really like this. And so when I was 12, I asked my parents if I could have a drum set, and they were like, well, where are you going to get a drum set? And I was like, I want that one. So then I asked my cousin if I could buy it off him, and he's like, yeah, you can have it for $100. So it was like a 4-piece kit, bass, 1 tom, floor tom, and then a snare drum. I had no cymbals to start with. And then I would just put on tunes and try to play along.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I got into middle school, they had a drum set there and they needed somebody to play. I was like, I kind of play a little bit. I don't know how to play cymbals yet, but I can bang on stuff and keep a rhythm. So
it was like a concert band setting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really funny. I actually got my first bass from my cousin.
Oh, cool.
Because at my other cousin's wedding, I won a PlayStation 2 in a raffle, and I already had a PlayStation 2, and I was like, I'll trade you this PlayStation 2 for your bass.
That's
and he's
awesome.
like, that is a really bad deal. This thing's a real piece of shit, man. It's and I was like, I don't care. I want it. I already have one of these.
He was honest about it.
Yeah. He was like, if you ever change your mind, just like feel free. And it's so funny because the the action was so ridiculously high, and I was already playing guitar, and I was just like, oh man, bass is hard.
You have to use your whole hand to push down the frets.
Yeah, I'm like learning Les Claypool riffs. I'm just like, ah.
Why is this not working?
Yeah.
It's all the same note. Yeah, and then I fell in love with drums. I've liked drums ever since I started playing.
And then, so you started playing in more structured settings in middle school.
Yeah, middle school, like playing with bands. Like we kind of had like a concert band and a bit of a jazz band. So I learned how to play drums in those settings, which was kind of neat. Like I didn't come in playing. It was just like, she was like, well, you're the only one that kind of knows how to play. You're just going to learn how to play now. Like, okay. Just start playing. And I really didn't know how to read music at all. Basics from learning how to play organ, but I couldn't just like look at a song and be like, oh, okay, well, that's the melody. Or like, this is the time signature. I would just get them to play. I always played by ear. So just like, start playing and I'll come in whenever.
And then did you start a band in high school or anything?
Yeah, that's when I really started to take music more seriously. Was I met a bass player, my best friend at the time, Dave, and then he had a friend who played guitar, and they were just like, hey, you play drums. Do you want to come play some drums for us? And I was like, yeah, let's do this. And so I started my first band when I was 14. Yeah, but 3/4 of the way through grade 9. Yeah, and it was awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. And we played like Nirvana covers because they were simple.
Did you write any?
We actually did. Our guitar player was very proficient. He'd been playing for a long time, and he had a lot of older friends that were really good guitar players. So he would write a bunch of stuff and bring it into us. And then I kind of tinkered around on bass when we were jamming and stuff like that. I've always liked being rhythm section. And so even growing up, like when I would listen to Motown tunes, I was either listening to the drums or I was listening to the bass. And so I started to like tinker around on bass, and I even wrote a couple tunes for the band that I was in. Just be like, I don't know what this is technically, but it sounds cool. Play along with it.
If it sounds good, it is good.
Yeah, right? It's just good. It's just good music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I was in and out of bands all the way through high school. Like playing with these people and that people. It's a lot of fun.
It was hard to record stuff. It was hard to record stuff when I was in high school. You're almost 10. No, you're 10 years older than me.
You're 29?
Yeah, I'm 29.
30, yeah.
So, yeah, that was... like, MySpace was a thing, and it was just at the point where, like, you know, you'd have these, like, air quotes budget studios, but like literally it would be like this setup that I have here would be like if I could time travel back to 2004 and charge a fuckload of money to record people, and it would be good. It would get people gigs, you know? So how... Like, when was the first time you got to record some of the stuff that
we were playing?
You were doing, yeah.
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
Is it okay to use your bathroom?
Yeah.
Like, that's such a funny way to think about jazz.
I'll just hit record because the one time, or a couple times, we've talked about a lot of stuff off mic, and then make references to it in the podcast. And there's been a few in editing these because I didn't we just took a break, by the way. This is where I'd stick in you know, my advertisements.
Blah 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 blah.
Yeah. The Michael AM radio show is brought to you by me throwing a bunch of money at a thing that I don't even understand why I'm doing it.
That's the beauty of podcasts, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know exactly why I'm doing it.
For sure you do.
Like, well, why would we do this outside of this context, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so, boom. It's the price of a podcast distribution subscription is well worth it.
Is it pretty... Can I ask you about that? Is it pretty high to, like...
It's... So, Libsyn... liberated syndication. That's what. So there's like Libsyn and Podbean are the two like pro podcast platforms, and it's pretty interesting. Wait, scratch that. It's not interesting at all.
It's very boring and
the
bland.
reason that there's 5 of these from like March of last year, and then none for a very long time, is because it took me so long to sit through all the literature on this distribution bullshit.
Okay.
And not that there's like legal issues. I'm also a very indecisive person. It wouldn't take a normal person this long. But with the podcasting thing is that if you're doing something like this where you're just trying to present a conversation, it takes up a very long amount of time, and the only site that will allow you to infinitely upload material is YouTube.
Oh, I remember you said that in like one of your posts.
Yeah. So like, but the problem with that is that YouTube eats up a lot of data for people, right? So they can't listen to it at work or in the car or whatever, and they can't save it. That was like a big fork in the road. So I started doing these, and it was still a very long process, because even after I had to do it, I had to take a picture and pair it with the video in a separate editing program, and then that has to like bounce down in real time. So it's 3.5 hours of upload time, not upload time, but just of iMovie finalizing the project file.
Yeah.
And then another, 5 hours of YouTube, accepting the file, right? But it was cool because, like, it allowed me to try it out for free.
Yeah.
And people were digging it, and I got some very helpful feedback on it and figured out where I could make it better. And then I started researching how do I get it so that people can download it and stuff. And the thing is about like iTunes and Spotify and stuff like that, you think that you're listening to stuff that they have, but they're just like a directory. So they don't have any data. They don't have any content on their website. You need to host it through a distributing platform. For music, it's something like DistroKid or TuneCore, right? And they hold your files, and what that does is that they have a lot more, I don't know the technical terms, but people can access it because they have the hardware that can handle this, all the fans of the Michael AM radio show who are going to be, scrambling to stream this when it comes out. If I put that on my website, it would just crash.
Yeah.
Right? I almost said that with a straight face. So you get something like Libsyn or Podbean, and they take your files and they have them, and they have the means to distribute that to everyone who wants to download it. And then you have to, it also generates an RSS feed, which is a code that you then import into iTunes and Spotify and Google Play Music and Podcast Addict and all this individually.
Yeah.
And you teach it to recognize when you've posted new stuff, and then add it to their library.
I did not know any of that.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Maybe I won't do a podcast.
You can try. Like figure out the Cubase first, and if that's easy peasy, then you take the next step, right?
Yeah.
Dang, well, we were talking about something.
Usually.
Yeah, usually. Didn't I have a notebook at some point?
I don't know where you put it.
Oh, it's right here.
There you go. We were talking about me drumming in high school. I think that's where we finished off.
Yeah. And then, and recording.
Oh, yeah,
back
how
in
we
the
were
day.
recording.
Yeah.
So when I was like first getting into bands and we would record stuff, 8-track players. Not like 8-track, but like 8-track recording devices. Like, I don't know if Tascam was around back then, but I want to say that my friend Joe had like a Tascam, like with a cassette tape that you would like record and then dump tracks down onto another track. So you get
like a few inputs that you can feed microphones into, and they record straight to a tape.
Exactly. And then you could dump that recording down to like one track and then put more instrumentation on top of it.
Really?
So that's how they were doing it, was like however many inputs you could have going into one track, that would record, and then you would dump that one track down to another track. And then that would be its own separate track. So it would free all the other tracks up for you to record more and more and more. So you had like
that was kind of the...
I don't know how
the
it worked.
Norm for a while. That was like the best you could do.
That was the best.
Because I remember recording like that as well. And
which is way different than how I recorded in my bedroom, which was like...
Did you also do the thing where you record directly into a stereo and then you put the tape into another
Yes, I did.
player?
Yes, I did. That's how I recorded all of my stuff.
Oh, man.
It was awesome.
Oh,
so many recordings got ruined though because of it. It was just such a complicated process.
Yeah.
So you like record a track and then you put the microphone or direct line it into another stereo and record from there over top.
It's just depressing. It's almost like dial-up.
One song was like 10 different tapes you would have.
Yeah.
Right. But back in the day, you just did what you had to do. Right? If you wanted to put out stuff, it was just like you just did it. Like you would figure it out.
So then after high school, you went straight to working at a factory?
Yeah. Once I graduated high school, luckily, fingers crossed, I did it. Because all I wanted to do in high school was play drums and smoke weed. That was pretty much it. When I got out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I applied to 4 different programs at 4 different schools. Got accepted to them all, and I was like, I don't want to do any of these things.
What did you apply to?
I applied to Sheridan for audio. I applied to Niagara for broadcasting. I applied to OCA.
Dodged a bullet there.
Yeah. I applied to OCA. Yeah, I know, right? Like nobody wants to be in broadcasting. I applied to OCA for fine arts. And I applied to, where else did I apply? Somewhere else. I think for like journalism. And this is like, those were the things that I was kind of interested in. And then once I got accepted, I was like, I don't want to do any of those things. So I got a job in a factory building school buses, and it was awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. So I did that for like 5 years or so. It was a good job. Like, don't get me wrong. It was hardcore, backbreaking manual labor, but for a 19, 20-year-old, it was fantastic money, and it got me a van and a sweet drum set. Like, I ended up getting like a custom-made drum set out of it. So,
was there a lot of variety in that gig, or was it pretty monotonous?
It was. The factory that I worked at, I worked primarily in the paint shop. So there was a few different jobs that you would do inside the paint shop. So you weren't always doing the same thing, which was nice. But it was literally backbreaking labor. So it got to the point where I couldn't... I was also, for the listeners out there, I used to be a bodybuilder, which is very difficult to tell these days if you see me. But it was getting to the point where I was getting so injured at work that I couldn't lift and I couldn't play. Like I was repetitive strain injuries through wrists and through elbows and through shoulders, and so finally I was like, I'd rather play and lift than do this. So that's when I quit my job. So I was in the factory for about 5 years, and then I went back to school.
We'll come back to your history in a second, but that's really funny because I was just reading a bunch of bios on De La Soul's. Of like De La Soul's teachers, because I was like, which classes do I want to go to? Because I don't think, does WagJag still exist? There's a Groupon.
It was a Groupon.
Yeah. So I got that in like November. Because I was in Costa Rica for all of October.
Was it just this past November you started coming?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like you've been coming longer than that.
It had been so long since the last time I'd been there that they didn't mind me using it.
Yeah, I think it's like you've been gone for a little.
Yeah, so
Cool,
you've seen me before.
Okay, so
then.
that's what makes sense then.
Yeah.
That you were there before that, but then you came back.
I'm kind of like the way you are with music lessons. I'm a lot like that with yoga. I don't. It's not arrogance. It's just that like I can't handle the instruction from most people.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
It was really funny because like literally every single bio was like so and so did this up until they got fucked up and then they could only do yoga, but then they found out they really liked yoga.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was like, man, doesn't anyone just like yoga? But just a little aside, we don't have to answer that question.
Doesn't anybody just want to get into yoga?
Yeah, don't you just want to?
That's how I found it. I just found it from the life of a bodybuilder is a life of pain. You just walk around in pain all the time. Yeah. My wife just got sick of hearing me talk about how painful my legs were after every Friday. And so she's like, you should come do some yoga. Okay. Why not?
It didn't take much talking you into it?
No, because I'd already been doing, I was personal training at the time, and there was different classes happening in the studio that I worked at. So I would go and do a Pilates, like a ball Pilates class. And the girl who used to teach ball Pilates had a background in yoga. So she would talk about not the spiritual side, but like energetic side and like being present while you're doing a movement. And the cool thing about that was bodybuilding and lifting was kind of like that. Like if we go back to Arnold Schwarzenegger, if your mind's not in the muscle, then the muscle's not working properly. It's working, but it's not working well. And so Pilates was a way for me to get even more in tune with what I was doing. Because especially as a bodybuilder, you learn to ignore pain or try to ignore pain.
Right.
Try to just pretend like it's not there. And then, when my wife said you should come and do some yoga, I was a little bit skeptical because I knew that I was probably going to be the only guy there. And which is different than the gym, because at the gyms that I would go to, they were mostly bodybuilding gyms, which is just pretty much all dudes.
Yeah.
And maybe like one hardcore girl who was just super jacked.
Yeah.
And so, she took me to my first class.
Starla.
Starla. Starla.
You think anyone thinks I'm a failure? Because I go to Starla every night.
Grab my hand. No. The other hand. No. My other hand.
Okay, so
any conversation with pop culture references, I'm a big fan of.
yeah.
If you guys don't know, that was Napoleon Dynamite reference.
Think anyone wants a roundhouse kick to the face? I'm wearing these bad boys. We just started watching The Mindy Project, which is...
Oh, yeah, I know that show.
Oh, my God, so good. I don't, like... Netflix has been recommending it. It's like, because you watch The Office. And I'm like, yeah, but she's my least favorite character from The Office.
It's true.
And then it's amazing. It's so good. And like, BJ Novak's also like a...
He's like a writer, isn't he?
Executive producer,
Yeah.
and he writes some episodes. He's in it a couple times. But...
I love the supporting cast. See, I'm not a huge fan of her on that show. I like the supporting cast. Like, there's a couple people like... Oh, I forget what that one guy's name is, but he used to be on Mad TV.
Oh, Ike Barinholtz.
Yeah.
He's brilliant.
He's hilarious. I love that guy.
Yeah. And then there's that younger doctor who he's still using Borat references.
Yeah.
And I love that. And in the last episode I watched, he said, like, it wasn't even a joke. They didn't linger on it. In mid-sentence, he just was like, my wife doesn't like when I go to the... And it's amazing because, like, he's like kind of like grown up and gotten married and stuff, but he's still like, you can't beat that out of him.
My wife.
And you'll never, I'll never grow out of Napoleon Dynamite references.
Ever.
It's been 15 years.
Anytime I can reference that or Sacha Baron Cohen in like
yeah,
in anything.
Oh my God.
I like
So building school buses helped you afford to be in a band. It helped you afford a career as a musician for a little while.
Oh yeah. I was in a band at that time. I was in a band, and I think they might even still be around. They're called Broom Filler.
Oh, they are.
Are they? Oh,
I
you
looked
know
it up. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so Broom Filler was like the idea of the guitar player who was Richard Lako at the time, and we went to the same high school together. He was actually my first inspiration as a drummer. I remember when I was in middle school, he was in sort of like an associated high school, and they came to our school one day and they played Wipeout, and he was the drummer.
Oh,
and I was like, I want to be just like you. And then later on, he sort of did the Dave Grohl thing where he was in a band playing drums, and then they fell through, and he wanted to be singer-songwriter, so he started playing guitar and singing. And he knew that I played. We'd been talking to each other in high school a little bit, and then he asked me to play drums for his band Broom Filler, which was cool because he already had being a drummer and a guitar player and a singer, he knew how to play bass too. He had a recording device in his house, so he recorded everything by himself so that he could give us demos as what to play. Nice. So it was awesome. It's like that was the first time I'd ever been in a band where somebody was like, "Here, just play this. Everything's been written for you." I'm like, "Awesome, I can play that." Yeah, and so we were together for a while.
So you didn't have. I feel like I at that age had too much of an ego to just accept that.
Thing.
Yeah,
he was very liberal in that this is the groove that I would like you to play, but within that groove you can kind of take some license. So once you like
settled into it,
yeah,
it didn't. Oh, okay,
yeah, and it was in the beginning. It was only maybe like 4 or 5 tunes, and then everything after that was us writing together.
Nice.
Yeah.
What year did you stick with them till? Do you remember?
Oh, I was with them till I was 21. So that would have been, again, I'm terrible with mathematics. It's like,
okay.
I was born in 79. We parted ways when I was 21-ish. So that would have been like 2000, like early 2000s maybe.
So you're the exact same age as both the guys in Death from Above 1979. Did you ever bump into them like on the scene back when you were playing?
No, I never.
No.
That would have been cool though.
Yeah, I was...
but that was a cool gig for me because, especially before I turned 19, Richard was very pushy, and that's kind of like how he got most of his gigs, was just by being really persistent and annoying. And so we would get gigs all the time in Toronto, playing at bars. And even like we started playing when I was in high school together. So I wasn't even in the factory when we started playing together. And we would go up to Toronto, and like I'm like 17, 18 years old at the time, like playing in bars and like coming back to high school the next day, and people were like, "Oh, what did you do like last night?" And they're like, "Oh, we hung out in the Godfather's parking lot." And they were like, "What did you do?" And I was like, "I was in Toronto playing at a bar." Awesome. So it was a cool experience in high school to be able to go do stuff like that because he had a bunch of hookups from other bands that he'd played with.
I saw this video of theirs. I don't think the timelines line up, and it was all fisheye lens, so I couldn't tell. And also, but it was like this like Much Music thing where they all go in a van, and they like perform in. Did you ever play?
I was never a
in
part
a
of
van?
that. No. We did have a video at one point that we did because Richard was in school for film at Sheridan when we were together. And so we recorded a video for a song called Cruisin.ca, which was funny because like that's pretty much like when the internet came out.
Nice.
Like when .ca was like a thing. And but that video was all shot at my parents' house.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was a neat video. It was a very cool concept.
That's awesome. Man, the times, they are a-changing.
They are changing.
You were 21, and then you were like 23, you said, when you went
23
to Mohawk?
when I went back to school for music, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. And
so in the interim after Broom Filler, I was playing with, I started playing with a band called I Can Find, which was very sort of Deftones, System of a Down influenced. That was a lot of fun. And then the CD that I gave you today, which was Lemon Plastic, Lemon Plastic was born out of I Can Find.
Oh, cool.
So the guitar player and maybe it was just me and the guitar player that eventually ended up being in Lemon Plastic, and then we brought in like this really super sick young bass player from Port Dover, and he was just like, he was already a phenom at like 18 years old, 19 years old, just like ripping it up on bass. And so, yeah, then we started doing that. And that was much more of because the guitar player was really into Faith No More, Tomahawk, anything Mike Patton related, Mr. Bungle. And so that's sort of what Lemon Plastic was about, was we were very sort of style fusion-y Mr. Bungle mixed with some Dillinger Escape Plan-ish type stuff, and then Tomahawk-y kind of grooves.
I'm excited to hear this. Where'd you record that?
We recorded that album in his basement, because at the time that's when like Cubase was just starting to pop up as like a platform that people were using to record things. So everything was done in his basement. Like I think he took out a loan from the bank and bought a bunch of gear to record. And so he just set up a recording studio in his basement. And he actually did a bunch, like not just us, but a bunch of local bands in the area. He would just like, come on in, we'll record and get you a demo. And so it was super cool.
So much respect for that, man. I can't stand the, what do you call it? The GoFundMe Indiegogo thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's a loan. Don't just ask people for money for stuff you haven't done yet, dude. Take an actual chance.
Go to the bank.
Yeah, exactly. You just get free money. You need that fear?
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So,
and the guitar player had gone to Trebas. He went to was it Trebas that he went to? Or no, there used to be a recording studio out near Stony Creek that was really big at the time, and I forget what it was called.
It's not Grant Avenue?
No,
that's the other way.
No,
sorry,
it was like
I
out.
was thinking.
Like if you drove down Centennial from the mountain, and then once you got down the mountain, you turned right, and it was like
Hive.
No, it wasn't that either.
That was.
But
that
anyway,
was the
like
Threat
that's where he
Signal
went.
guys,
That's where he went and
I
did
think.
some schooling. So it was like he had a background in it, which was good. And then he just was like, "Let's do it. Let's get a bunch of equipment and record." And I was like, "Okay."
That's cool.
I'll set up my big ass drum set
And then, were you still playing while you were in music school, or did you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think Lemon Plastic broke up just before I started school. Or was I still in school with them? Oh, no, I was still in school with them, because I remember more specifically that when I started learning more about musical theory, the bass player, he already had a musical background, like theory background. So we would start writing stuff together, and our guitar player didn't have a theory background. And so there was some friction in the relationship. Yeah, some friction in the relationship about like he didn't really want to do theory based stuff because I think he was kind of afraid of it.
Yeah.
And we were starting to write stuff that I don't think that he really got from a theoretical perspective. Mm-hmm. And so eventually we ended up breaking up. But yeah, I remember that as I was learning things about music and in music from school, we started to bring it into what we were writing together, and the bass player and I sort of like kept progressing, and he was still doing he was a really good musician for not having any schooling or a theory background. He was super creative and a brilliant writer.
It's funny how music school, in a weird way, kind of like spoils whatever natural musicianship you have
for a little while,
and then you have to like integrate it. Afterwards.
I agree with that for sure. Because there's so many rules within musical theory that it's like, especially when you're going to school for it, there's rules that need to be followed.
But then you learn that the rules only existed to explain the sounds
exactly
in the first place.
Yeah, the theory is just there to explain what was happening. Like the theory isn't the basis of it, right? The music came first. The theory is just how to describe it. Mm-hmm. Right? Especially with counterpoint in school, like
yeah.
I basically just the only reason I passed counterpoint in school was because I'm okay with math.
It's just Sudoku.
It's just math. Like as long as the spacing and the notes weren't clashing with each other, then it was like, as long as I could remember the numbers of counterpoint, I was like, cool. I never wrote anything brilliant in counterpoint, but I always passed.
Yeah. See, I'm stupid. I didn't get. I mean, I got that was what we were trying to do, but I didn't get that that's all that it was.
It's just
I
mathematics.
I tried to make a composition out of every counterpoint assignment, and it took me so long. And then Nick Deutsch would be like, "Oh, you've got a jazz harmony disease here."
That's awesome.
And he'd be like, "I like this very much, but it's not what Bach would have done." And I was like, "Can it not be?" It's like, that's not what this class is.
No, exactly, right. And that's why I got like decent marks in counterpoint, just because this is like, well, I'm going to write a line, and then I'm just going to make sure that all the notes that need to coincide with that line are of mathematical equivalence. And I'm like, okay, counterpoint done.
Yeah, my friend was a drummer, and he didn't even try to like listen to his or do anything.
No, I didn't listen to any of mine.
Yeah, exactly.
None.
And he'd always do, like, I still did really, really well in that class, like, but he would always do better than me, and it took him 1/5 of the time that it took me, and I was like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I would come up with a basic melody on my keyboard, and that was it. Okay, there's the melody. Now all I got to do is match notes, and that's yay math. Yay basic addition and subtraction.
Do you ever think about what a meeting with your younger self would look like? Would you like each other?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
I wouldn't.
Really?
My younger self, I think, wouldn't like me, and I wouldn't.
My younger self might be like, why are you not doing as much acid as I'm doing? But most of my likes are still the same. Like for me, yoga was kind of an offshoot of working out. So it was another way to be physical. And then I found that there was way more to yoga than just my body.
What year did you start doing yoga?
My first class was in February of 2006.
2006. You were already playing a lot less?
Yeah, I was...
when did you become a personal... or was it a physical trainer?
Personal trainer. So when I got out of Mohawk, so that was like 23 to 26-ish, I tried to make a living like playing and teaching lessons.
Hard.
And I couldn't take it. Like the playing was fine, except you're poor. And the music lessons was a good way to make up that extra chunk of money, but I hated teaching people that didn't want to learn. Because most of the students that I had been forced into like learning from their parents. And a lot of the times I was just like me and an 8-year-old kid talking about Pokemon. And I'm like, if I have to talk about Pokemon one more time today, I'm going to shit my pants.
See, I love Pokemon. That's why I'm good at it.
It's funny because nowadays I would totally be into talking about Pokemon because my son's into Pokemon. But back then I was just like, I had no patience to teach people that didn't want to learn. And so I got out of it, and playing wasn't enough to keep me alive.
Yeah.
So then the question basically in my mind was, what else do I really like to do? And I'd been weight training since I was 17 and always kind of teaching people how to do it. So my friends would be like, well, can you take me to the gym and show me what to do? So I'd been personal training since I was a teenager. And when I dropped teaching music, I was like, well, what else do I really like to do? I like to lift weights. I can teach people how to do that. Let's get a personal training certificate.
What does it take to get that?
A weekend.
Really?
Depending. So I
feel like I looked into it briefly, and it was like a weekend, and then I looked into it more, and then it was like, but to take the thing, you need some sort of background.
Not like back when I did my personal training cert, so like 2004 to 2006-ish, there's a company called CanFit Pro who you can go and take a weekend course and learn a bunch of stuff. And then at some point you have to write a theory exam and you have to do like a practical assessment on somebody. The good thing for me was I already had a background in it, so it was super breezy. But there was people in my course that wanted to be personal trainers that had never even touched a dumbbell, and they wanted to teach people how to lift weights. And I was like, I don't agree with that.
And they passed the course?
They still passed the course.
Got
their certification, and who knows what they're doing these days. Like for me, CanFit Pro was a given because I already had the background. I just needed the piece of paper to get a job.
Yeah.
But there are other personal training certification programs out there, like the ACE program, and there's even a couple other ones that are more locally to Canada that they're much more comprehensive than just going for a weekend. Like they're month-long programs. You can even go and take a course at Mohawk these days and become a personal trainer.
That's like a 2-year program, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it should be. Like,
yeah,
it really should be.
Yeah,
especially when you're dealing with general public people who have X amount of limitations, and right, like you need to be aware of those things before you just throw a dumbbell at somebody and say, "Here, lift this."
Yeah. Did you do your yoga certification at De La Soul or?
No, I didn't. De La Soul didn't even have a teacher training program when I did my TT.
Oh, wow.
So I did my yoga story is really, I found out later that it's more common, but at the time I thought it was like very individual, like I'm a unique snowflake. But I did my first class in February of 2006, and walking out of that class, I literally leaned over to my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, I'm going to do this forever. That there was something about the way that I felt after practice. So I was like, this is amazing. And then, so I jumped right into practice, and I bought a bunch of DVDs, and I started going to classes, and I kind of knew that I wanted to start doing something like that, like sort of teaching it, because I was already teaching movement anyway. And as part of being a personal trainer at the studio that I worked at, I was also teaching like big group boot camp style classes. So it wasn't a big transition for me to teach yoga because I was already teaching group fitness classes somewhere else. And I was supposed to start my teacher training in September, but for some reason it got bumped up to like April or May. And so the teacher of the program, who is a woman in Dundas, I think she's actually in Hamilton now, her name's Heather Greaves. And so she's like, well, do you still want to do it? It's like, okay, I've really only been practicing for a few months, but let's do it. And so that was a year-long program, 200 hours over 1 year, which was really nice because it gave you a lot of time to develop and to practice like what you were learning. And then so I did that, and then that's when I started teaching yoga. I started teaching at the studio, the personal training studio that I was working at, and then I just decided I didn't really want to be a personal trainer anymore because I didn't really like the industry. And then I started to make a switch over to teaching yoga full time, and then that's when De La Soul that's when I started teaching at De La Soul. Wow. I started practicing at De La Soul in like 2007 upon recommendation from another teacher who I was studying with, and she was more of like a classical hatha yoga teacher. Which meant, like, as far as you know, like sun salutations, you might not do sun salutations in classical hatha, and if you do, it's not like the sun salutations that we tend to do at De La Soul. And so we would get to the portion of doing sun salutations, and I would be like jumping up and down, and be like, "Yes, finally!" and she's like, "You've got a lot of energy. I think you need a different style of practice." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So then she pointed me to De La Soul, which at the time was on Aberdeen, just like it was one room. Do you know where the Aberdeen Tavern is?
Yeah.
So in the building
That's
beside
where De La Soul was?
In the building beside that is
Whoa.
there's like lawyers and stuff in there now, but she was second floor, Katie was second floor of that building. So it's just one big room that we would all practice in.
Wow.
And then like I think 10 years ago, I think we just had 10-year anniversary for De La Soul. 10 years ago they opened a location on York.
Cool.
I taught the first class there.
And then the very first
class.
Nice.
Very first hot class was me. Only because the girl who was supposed to teach it got sick, I think.
Oh, no.
And so she's like, do you want to teach it? I was like, I don't know, but sure.
I remember my first hot class. It was intense.
Yeah, so was mine.
I
almost vomited and blacked out.
I don't know if I got too baked or if that was the thing that got me through it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was like the most present I've ever been. I was just like, just control your breathing. If you don't, everyone else does this on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. The only thing that's going to make this troublesome, and you read some, if you're like researching it, I haven't heard anything negative about it recently, but I think when it started popping up everywhere, there were a lot of people being like, "Oh, people are blacking out in hot classes. Is this something you should be doing?" And I was like, "You're a 20-year-old healthy person. The only thing that could possibly go wrong is you stress yourself out about it."
Yeah.
So I was just focusing on not being the person who blacks out in the hot yoga class. And it was such an incredibly just kind of like single-minded experience. Mm-hmm. And I loved that. I read a little, who was it? Robert Svoboda?
Robert Svoboda, yeah.
Yeah,
Ayurveda.
he has, I saw the place that I was staying in Costa Rica had a very cool library full of esoteric texts and other interesting things in this
Costa Rica is like a yoga hub. It's been like that for a while.
Yeah, that was I was actually thinking about that when I was talking about things kind of coming up independently. Why is it that so much of South America has? Is it just people bringing it there, or is there? Yeah. Okay, so none of it came up.
I don't,
there?
as far as I know, no. But there was a trend. Like even when I did my certification with Heather, but she used someone else's program. And so the program that I was trained in was called Integrative Yoga Therapy. Joseph and Lillian LePage were the founders of that company, and they were out of Costa Rica. Like there was a lot of people, North Americans, moving to Costa Rica and South America just to live and to practice and to run retreats. And so then all of a sudden Costa Rica became like this big mecca for yoga, right? Which was very strange, I thought.
It is strange on paper just because of how far it is from where it originated, but also the general mindset of the population. They just seem to have a different set of priorities, and it seems very in line with kind of the yogic.
Yeah, like a natural lifestyle, listening to nature, doing things like that.
Yeah.
I've never been to Costa Rica, so I don't know what the mentality is. But I imagine that's one of the reasons why the yogis stuck around. It's like they went down there and was like, oh, this is an awesome place. People get us here. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, so the animal life and the plant life, that's one thing that you find yourself kind of just like death is kind of like always in your face, but also in this like totally natural sense. Like the dog would eat a lizard or something like that, and you'd be like, oh god, we named this iguana. And then there would be like this giant disgusting cockroach, and you're like, oh no, is he gonna crawl on our food? And then he just gets swarmed by fire ants, and you watch them eat his insides and carry them to his
I have friends that live in Australia, and they're always posting stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if I could live in a place like that.
Yeah,
just walking around like majestic, but always on guard that some like poison toad is going to rub up against you. Or
am I going to get bitten by a black mamba and suffer to death over the next 8 hours?
Yeah,
who knows?
Or I would have friends like that would backpack through Costa Rica, and they would come back and just be like, so many parasites. Like, oh my god, so many parasites in you.
Yeah, insect bites and such.
Yeah,
but it's beautiful, worth it.
I've heard really good things about it.
So this Robert Svoboda book, the one, I don't know why I was surprised to see the little section of the book dedicated to cannabis, and that's like in India, that's a huge part of their culture.
Big.
They have chillum pipes.
Yeah, I was going to say,
everyone
they mix it with like different herbs and stones. Like they'll put jewels in it and stuff too, and
it's very mindfully used, I think, in those traditions as well. It's not. I think one of the biggest, not dangers, but it's just kind of like a mini tragedy is how people use that as like a party drug.
Yeah.
Like it's so, just like, oh, we're going to do pails and everyone's just going to sit quietly for the next 45 minutes contemplating their lives. Like what? It's just like, it seems like a big misunderstanding. But the book, it didn't set apart this plant from, like chamomile, or it's just the next chapter, like in alphabetical order or whatever.
It has a use, and they know how to use it, right?
And so what do you know that Ayurveda says about that plant?
So if one thing to look at, like especially with these days when we have things like hybrids and indica strains and sativa strains, one thing is to look at the strain. Like what are the general side effects of the strain it is that you're using? Because in Ayurveda, we start to look at things like what we call constitution or dosha, And different types of substances are going to have different effects on different constitutions. And so if you have somebody who's of a more, let's say, an air element type of person, which means they're already like prone to being spacey, or anxious on sort of like maybe a negative side of things, that you might not want to give them like a really strong sativa because it might make it worse. Right. So instead, if you're going to use it as a medicine, you're going to go more towards something like an indica side of things. But yeah, it's not uncommon in Ayurveda to use cannabis as a medicine, like you would use everything else, just that it has its time and its place. And it really all depends on sometimes what you even mix it with. So it's not uncommon to mix cannabis with another root called calamus root. Theoretically, the calamus sort of takes some of the edge off of the cannabis, so you get the benefits, but you don't necessarily get like the anxiety or the jitteriness because of it.
And is that I don't think Ayurvedically it's, you know, right, or at least in that book it made no mention of smoking it. It seems like it's
like, yeah,
I don't think smoking.
No, smoking is totally normal. It depending.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It really, again, it depends on the context. It depends on the individual. It depends on the method. But it's not uncommon in Ayurveda to be prescribed something to smoke, whether it's like, and it doesn't even have to be cannabis. It could be. I
don't know. Is it pronounced Gotu-kola?
Gotu-kola.
Gotu-kola.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you could smoke that, but you can also make a tea out of it. You can smoke a bunch of different kinds of herbs, like really anything that you can pick and dry, then you can smoke. Right.
And what was that? The herb you mentioned that takes the edge off?
Calamus root.
And would you smoke those together? Or would you create like?
Yeah, you would mix a little bit of calamus, like dried calamus root, in with the cannabis and smoke them together.
Huh. Interesting. And that would be prescribed for, say.
Right. Again, it really depends on what it's being prescribed for, but some people with anxiety, like it wouldn't be uncommon you'd want to be, in Ayurveda, you'd always want to be careful with what you prescribe and how you prescribe it.
Yeah.
But a big thing with Ayurveda is just like, try it. Don't try too much at first. And then just notice how you feel. Like that's a big thing in Ayurveda, is just notice how you feel, which is why like, traditionally, Ayurveda and yoga came up hand in hand. Like there's known as sister sciences. That traditionally they always walked hand in hand, and it wasn't until when India started to get taken over by, I think it was the British, that yoga was kind of kept around somewhat because it was seen as being helpful, right? Like you could train the British Army to get more flexible and be more mindful, but that coming in with their own sort of medical system, Ayurveda was pushed down and outlawed in a lot of India. Outlawed. Yeah, you couldn't practice it in some places.
Wow.
Right. That it was just like the really, really small villages that it survived in, and until now, when Ayurveda is like super popular. Still not as popular as Chinese medicine, but it's like Ayurveda is on an upsweep right now.
Wow. That's cool. Where did you study that?
I studied Ayurveda in Toronto with a man. I talked about Matthew Remsky before. Yeah. So I studied with him for 2 years. Was
that like an apprenticeship or
there was a group of us that would come in and we would study with him, and he had a curriculum. Like, so we had textbooks and stuff like that. And there's other Ayurvedic practitioners in the world. A guy out of New Mexico, his name's Vasant Lad, who's originally from India, and he's sort of a big name in Ayurveda. And he has, I think it's like 3, I have 2 of the textbooks, but they're like thick textbooks. Like they're 1.5 inches thick. And so there's some study out there. And I didn't make it all the way through the program that Matthew had to offer, simply because he kind of stopped offering it because there was a lack of interest.
Oh, wow.
Which was unfortunate, but I still continue to read and to study and to, like Robert Svoboda's like sort of a go-to reference, and Vasant Lad, and maybe at one point I'll get a piece of paper that says I'm certified. Mm-hmm. But even when I talk to people about Ayurveda, it's only the basics. Like I teach the basics of theory and constitutional assessment, and that's it. Like I'm not helping people with their diabetes and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's weird because the stuff's capable of some pretty powerful stuff, and I think there are people who really know it well. Mm-hmm. But it also, it also has the potential to be such like a, flaky spirit science type.
Absolutely, yeah, a pseudoscience, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what the thing with Ayurveda is, because like one thing that Matthew Remski always used to say is that because Ayurveda is such an individual thing, good luck, randomized, double-blind testing almost anything that Ayurveda has to offer.
Right.
Like there's a sort of it's like something that we might say in Ayurveda is that even though we have categories, even for constitutions, that nobody actually sits directly inside of that category. That we're categorizing something that's completely uncategorizable as being the individual.
And as you grow, you kind of drift more into one category or the other, no?
Sort of. It's like even the more that you study and practice Ayurveda, you even just let go of the categories completely. Like even though I might sit in a camp theoretically, if the practice is really about feeling your individuality within the context of your environment, and then the more that you tune into that, you don't even need a category to play off of anymore, as much as you just need the ability to tune into how you feel and what you think the proper plan from there is, right? So in Ayurveda, the general rule is like, if you feel like you're out of balance, you counterbalance in the opposite direction, right? So a simple thing to do is, if in Ayurveda, let's say you're feeling cold and dry, and that's kind of a negative thing, you're going to counter with something that is warm and moist, right? Have more soup, go to the sauna, right? Things like general things like that. And so like my practice in Ayurveda isn't like, okay, I'm a Pitta-Vata, and Pitta-Vatas can eat this and they can't eat that, and they can do this and they can't do that. That's not really a reference point for me anymore. It's more of, I know what my propensities are. I know what I'm prone to. And if I feel like I'm going out of balance, I just pacify in the opposite direction, and I'm pretty good.
Mm. Right. There's a line of, I want to say it's even like Tetley tea. It's like, you've seen
Tetley,
it?
Yeah, Tetley has Ayurvedic teas for constitutions.
Which is weird, because it's like you said, like there's not a knowledge of it. There's not really there wasn't enough of a market for this information that your teacher stopped teaching it. Mm-hmm. And it's so strange to see like this massive tea company
sort of latching onto the popularity of it, because they saw the market for it, right?
Teas.
It's very good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like the herbs and the spices that you're going to find in those teas are everyday herbs and spices. Like it's nothing crazy. Mm-hmm. Like I think the Vata pacifying tea is something like cinnamon and ginger and a couple other things. It's just like, well, I can make that tea anyway. Like I don't need Tetley to make it for me. Mm-hmm. But this is like, as far as that's concerned, we're getting into what my teacher used to call cookie cutter Ayurveda, where it's like you take the theoretical side of it, and then that's what you do. Is you take just the theoretical, not the individual side of anything, not the actual, like, if we want to say like the applicable clinical side of things of like working with an individual. You just take the theory of it and you say like, well, if you're an air element type of person, which means you sit in the what's known as the Vata camp, you just take all of the herbs that are supposed to pacify excessive Vata and you put it in a tea. And you say like, well, this is going to be good for every Vata individual. And Ayurveda is like real Ayurveda is like, no, that's not true. Right? Like it might be helpful, but it might actually not be helpful.
Like you might have something where like your foot has a kapha imbalance or something, right? Yeah. Like the rest of you is good, but your spleen is off. And someone who really knows that stuff might be able to identify it, but for Tetley to be like, hey.
Yeah, and it's not going to kill, like Vata, like none of that tea is going to really, like, as far as I know, going to kill anybody.
Yeah.
But it might help some people, and like especially if we keep in mind just the fact of placebo effects.
Yeah.
Like somebody's like, I took a quiz online and said I was an air element person and I'm going to take this tea and everything's fine ever since I started drinking this tea. Because I read a book from Robert Svoboda. Just as a reference, I have to go soon.
Yeah, sure. All right, let's. I'm beeping. All right, let's Let's wind this down. All right. I mean, okay. Last.
My wife's like, where are you?
My wife.
My wife. She says, get bananas and come home.
Oh, dang. See, how do we naturally wrap this up?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's sticking out to me, which is I have a couple more that I don't want to touch because they're kind of redonkulous, but
keep in mind, like, before you put this out, if you wanted to get together even again quickly, like, I'm totally fine with that too.
Cool. We'll have you back for another episode.
Okay, cool.
Like I said, I want to. I mean, everyone so far, I was just like, dang, like I want new people, but I want all these people again, right?
Because there's so much information, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not gonna get everything Keiko's been studying about, music and
cognition.
Yeah, music cognition for the last 4 years in a even 2-hour interview. All right. Here's how we balance out all this stuff. The self-help vortex. That's a term I coined.
That's like, I like that.
By your laugh, I can tell you know exactly what you mean. So where does one draw the line and just live?
So the big question through time is, and this is philosophy, is how to live a life. Like, that's really the basis of all philosophy, is how to live a life. And one of the questions that pop up in like, say, one of the things to contemplate in especially Buddhism is, right, let's say even from a biological perspective, we're geared towards getting what we want and avoiding suffering, right? Or moving towards happiness and away from suffering. The difficulty is that through time and through lineage, there's never been an agreement on, like, what is real happiness and how to get it. We all, or even, like, if I don't want to suffer, which is a biological response that we have, I don't want to suffer. How do we decrease suffering and increase the other stuff? And that's really where most philosophies are butting heads, is on, like, what does it actually mean to be happy, and how does one go about doing that? Right? Like, that's the big question in philosophy, is how do I decrease my suffering? How can I be happier? And so self-help as a genre is this, like, because you've got so many philosophical perspectives, right? Like, there's, even if we talk about yoga, there are so many different sub-philosophies, sub-systems, and sub-cultures, even within yoga, that are all going to have a slightly different perspective on what it is to live a life and what that would look like. And
you might find something that's helping you, but you need help every day.
Every day you need help.
And then you find sometimes you're, like, overdosing on help.
Absolutely. And like, I'll say this in class sometimes, is because we might even talk about yoga as being, air quotes, the path of self-improvement. But when does self-improvement stop being self-improvement and become neuroses? Yeah. Right? Like, when does it become an OCD type of obsession? And then this is where you start to get conditions like orthorexia, which is like, do you know what orthorexia is?
No.
It's a condition where a mental condition where things cannot be pure enough. So, like, only organic foods, only pure. It's kind of like an obsession with being pure and being natural, to the point where people are getting OCD-ish about things like that. Mm-hmm. Like, I won't eat food unless it's organic. I won't eat food unless, like, I won't eat an egg unless it's pasture raised, right? But not in a self-help way, in like a neurotic way. Like, if anything else other than that is happening, things are going to go tragically wrong. I'm probably going to get a disease and die. Yeah. Right. Like, if I don't eat organic kale, I'm probably going to get boils on my face. Right. But for me, like self-help is good. And being able to look at a bunch of different perspectives is helpful. The problem that I see with the self-help vortex is that it's really easy to get wrapped up in the idea that if I know a philosophy intellectually, that's somehow going to change my life. So there's this idea that just by reading this, I don't know, Eckhart Tolle book or a Wayne Dyer book or a Michael Stone book, that if I read this book, it's going to teach me everything that I need to know, and that everything's going to change just because I read the book. And there's something that I say in class very often is that all philosophy points to practice. Right? That every philosophy is pointing toward you doing something with the philosophy that you're trying to adopt. And for me, that's the big problem with the self-help vortex, is there's so much philosophy that people aren't practicing, right? That there's so many ideas that seem like great ideas, but nobody's really taken the time to do them or to do them consistently. Right? And especially in our culture that we might say is very eclectic, right? So it's like, I'm going to take a piece from this and a piece from that and a piece from that and a piece from this. And there's a tantric guy, we sort of call him like a practitioner scholar. His name's Chris Wallace. And he says one of the biggest problems is that we're piecemealing all of these philosophies together in a way that's actually incongruent with all of those philosophies. We're just picking the pieces that we like, because that's kind of what we do as a culture. I'll just pick what I like out of this, and I'll pick what I don't like that stuff. I'll pick what I want. Everything's going to be sunshine.
Which ironically, we've both admitted to doing this.
For sure, yeah. And for me, philosophy without practice is useless. Or even recognizing when I might have a philosophy that's here, but my practice doesn't actually meet my philosophy. So sometimes as an extreme sort of example, like, my philosophy is that everybody's one. We're one, Michael. You and me, we're one. But if you put dairy in my latte, fuck you. Right? If I do dairy, I'm going to shit my pants and puke all over my son. And so it's like, I have this philosophy up here that I'm trying to hold on to, but my practice is like so far away from my philosophy. Right? And like, that becomes an issue where the practice of the living isn't meeting up with the philosophy that we're trying to hold on to. And that's like one of the things that I love about Buddhism, and especially Zen, is it's like everything is practice. In Zen, everything is practice. That there's no real distinction between formal and informal, right? Formal being the time that maybe I spend on a cushion, and informal being every other part of my day.
Right.
Which is why I think one of the reasons, like in Zen, you have all of these things that, like maybe are classically Japanese culture, like calligraphy, the old, like the book Zen and the Art of Archery, flower arranging, tea ceremony, that you take all of these really, really mundane things and you turn them into a practice, so that every part of day is practice, right? So for me, parenting is practice, right? Not just, and sitting is also a practice. I sit every day. I do some sort of movement practice every day. But those maybe, like from a Zen perspective, those are just setups for the rest of my life. Right. My teacher always used to say the most important part of meditation practice is the first 20 minutes after you get up off your cushion, right? That you try to carry that kind of attention into what it is that you're doing. Because that can be the problem with meditation practices. Like, okay, I'm going to sit for 20 minutes and this is going to be great. But then as soon as I get up from my cushion,
you're on your way to work, flipping off the guy who cut you off.
Right. Or your kid pees on the floor and you're like, what the fuck? I told you 11 times that the potty's right there. Right. So, and that's like for me, and one of the things that I really love about Zen is some of the rituals that are involved in Zen practice, because the rituals are a way to take it off of a cushion and put it into something else. So before I sit, I have a little ritual that I do. When I get up from my cushion, I also have a ritual of putting my stuff away. So I try to take the mindfulness of sitting and attention of sitting into action. Right?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That's something that I've been trying to come up with, like sneaky little ways to like trick myself into getting addicted to like positive habits. You know, so coming up with some sort of, Because man, nothing beats that dopamine release of like the Instagram refresh button, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, how can I use that same system to
Exactly.
create positive habits instead of time wasting ones?
Instead of time wasting ones, or even recognizing like especially within Zen and other mindfulness practices, but especially even from a Western psychological and behaviorist perspective, with like sciences like functional contextualism and relational frame theory, of we can't ignore suffering, right? Like you can't ignore the shitty stuff. We've tried it and it doesn't work. We try to push it away. We try to avoid it. We create escape strategies. And this is one of the things that practitioners figured out like a long time ago, is that at some point you actually have to turn around and face the shitty stuff.
Yeah.
Right. That life is awesome and there's going to be some awesomeness to it. Life is not all suffering, but there's some inherent suffering in life. And if you're not willing to look at it and at least embrace some of it, then you're probably going to suffer more.
I think one of the biggest things that and it was really, my mom got me this like book about Taoism when I was maybe like 12 years old or something like that. And I think it might have even been at like Costco or something. And it just like had a yin yang and a dragon on it. And I was like, I want to learn where this stuff comes from.
Cool.
And it just like, there like the theory of opposites in there, where when you learn to be thankful for every negative experience, because without the suffering, you don't have a point of reference for joy.
Exactly.
And that's powerful stuff.
Yeah. And like there's a Zen practitioner named Norman Fisher, and I heard him giving a talk once, and he was like, and this was, I'd kind of heard stuff like it before, but the way he just worded it, which I think is another valuable thing to as many self-help books as there are out there, is you're going to find one book that kind of says things in the way that you need to hear them.
Yeah.
Because we're not all going to talk about it the same way. Like Eckhart Tolle isn't going to use the language that I use or the language that somebody else uses.
Sometimes you need to hear it from Kendrick Lamar.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
Or Drake.
Or Drake. But because of that, like one thing that Norman would say is like, if you really want to feel joy in your life, you also need to be able to hold suffering. Like the deepest suffering is the flip side of that is always going to be the biggest joy. And then he's like, if you don't believe me, just go have a kid. Because that's the thing, right? It's like, it's the cliche of having a kid is it's the most frustrating and anger driving sort of practice, but it creates the biggest benefit. Like I've never been as joyful as I've been like being with my kids, or like watching them pick up a new skill, or like there was one time when, because one thing that I tried to teach my son is it's okay to cry. Crying's fine, which definitely wasn't the way that I grew up. Like crying's okay, but at some point, holding on to that is actually going to get in the way of us sort of doing what we want to do or being who we want to be. And so I would teach my son like again and again and again, like, it's cool. He's like, I'm sad. I'm like, that's okay that you're sad. But just like recognize when it's okay to let that go, when it's okay for you to not be sad. And we would talk about it all the time. And then one day we went to Soccer World, and it was one of those days where a bunch of kids just get together and there's bouncy castles and stuff like that. So him and another kid bounced heads, and he took it very personal. We'd literally only been there for 5 minutes. And he comes out of the bouncy castle and he's like, I want to go. That boy hit my head. I need to get out of here now. And so we get back in the car and he's like, bawling and bawling and bawling. And we live in the East End and the Soccer World's in the West End. So we're driving all the way across town. And at some point around Gage Park, he stops crying and he says, Daddy. I was like, yeah, buddy. And we'd been talking about it as we're driving. And he says, I let it go. And all of a sudden I just like started bawling. And I was just like, oh man, that's so fucking powerful. I was just like, for as much as I feel the urge to strangle him sometimes, which I will never do, that there's those moments where the most joyous and pleasurable I've ever felt. were with my kids.
Oh, see, you just naturally segued into the topic of shadow integration, which we cannot touch on today because that's just a whole hour-long can of worms in itself at the really very least. So speaking of kids, I'll let you get back to yours.
Yeah.
Pick up some nutritious snacks. Like
my wife, she wants bananas. My wife.
Exactly. Anything you wanted for the book? Tell them to buy your book.
Buy my book when it comes out.
You hear that, Eric Thorkildson and Nate Waldez? They're the only two people who actually listen to these.
I'll be a listener now, so I'll hear myself.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'll have copies of it.
Hear that, Nate, Eric, and Steve?
So the book is
Steve's book.
The book is called My Act: Mindful Yoga Based Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. Especially if you're in mental health fields, it could be helpful for you. If you want to check me out on Instagram, my handle is at MoveWellFeelGood, all one word. I post stuff up there every once in a while. You can find me on Facebook, Steve Ferrell Yoga and Ayurveda, right? If you want to come to workshops and stuff like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.